News of the Times. British family murders. 7 true cases of betrayal, poisoning and deceit. Welcome to News of the Times. Tonight's episode is not a single case, but a collection of the most unsettling crimes to emerge from within the British home itself. Because behind closed doors, in kitchens, bedrooms and quiet family parlours, some of the most calculated and disturbing murders in history have taken place. In this episode, we examine 7 true cases of betrayal, poisoning and deception, crimes committed not by strangers, but by those closest to their victims. A father hanged for a murder that may never have happened. A young woman who poisoned her own sister for the price of a marriage license. A household where children died one by one until suspicion could no longer be ignored. And a man whose carefully written letters reveal a plot so brazen it ends in the deaths of 4 people for just £100. These are not crimes of sudden rage. They are calculated, often quiet, and in many cases hidden in plain sight. So as we move through these cases tonight, ask yourself one question. How well could anyone truly recognize danger when it comes from within their own family? If all of that sounds like your cup of tea, and not the modern sort that arrives dehydrated and faintly apologetic, do consider giving us a thumbs up. It helps enormously, and it reassures YouTube that we are in fact an educational channel and not a particularly well-lit Victorian mortuary. Now then, comfortable chair, quiet room, preferred beverage within reach. Let's begin. Case 1. The father who was hanged for a murder that never happened. In 1840. We start this episode with this case and what happens and appears to be a straightforward and deeply disturbing crime. A young woman lies dying on the floor of her home, a knife beside her, and with her final strength she points accusingly to her father, the man standing in the room. He is arrested, tried, and swiftly executed for her murder. It is, by all accounts, an open and shut case, but shortly after his death, a letter is discovered written by his daughter, and with it, the terrifying possibility that an innocent man has been sent to the gallows for a crime that never took place.
William Shaw, a respectable upholsterer residing in a village near Edin, had a daughter, Catherine, who lived with him. Catherine encouraged the advances of John Lawson, a jeweller, contrary to the wishes of her father, who had an inseparable objection against him, and urged his daughter to receive the addresses of a son of Alexander Robertson, a friend and a neighbour. The girl refused most peremptorily. The father grew enraged. Passionate expressions arose on both sides, and the words barbarity, cruelty, and death were frequently pronounced by the daughter. At length, her father left her, locking the door after him. The apartment was only divided by a slight partition from the one of Morrison, a watch casemaker who had indistinctly heard the diabolical conversation and quarrel between Catherine Shaw and her father. He was particularly struck with the words she had pronounced. For some time after the father had gone out, all was silent. Presently, Morrison heard several groans from the daughter. He called some of the neighbours, and these, listening attentively, not only heard the groans uttered from her faintly exclaim, "Cruel father, thou art the cause of my death." Struck with the expression, they got a constable and broke the door open, where they found the daughter, Catherine, weltering in her blood, and a knife found covered with blood near where she was laying. A surgeon was immediately sent for, and on examining the wound, there was no hope of her ever recovering, as the wound was mortal. She was still alive and speechless. On questioning her as to owing her death, she pointed to her father, who was present in the room in custody of an officer. At the sight of his daughter, he turns pale and ready to sink. The first surprise and his countenance left little doubt of his guilt in the breast of his beholders. He was instantly carried away before a magistrate, and upon the deposition of the parties, he was committed to trial. In vain did he protest his innocence and declare that the blood on his shirt was occasioned by his having blooded himself some days before, and the bandage having come untied. The circumstances appeared so strong against him that he was found guilty and was executed. His last words were, "I am innocent of my daughter's murder." There was scarcely a person who thought the father innocent, but a short time after, a man who had become the occupant of Shaw's apartment accidentally discovered a paper which had fallen into the cavity on one side of the chimney. It was folded as a letter, and, on being opened, was found to contain as follows: "Barbarous father, your cruelty is having put it out of my power ever to join my fate to that of the only man I could love, and tyrannically insisting upon my marrying one whom I always hated. This has made me form a resolution to put an end to an existence which is become a burden to me." The letter was signed Catherine Shaw, and, on being shown to her relations and friends, it was recognized as her writing. The magistrate of the town examined it, and on being satisfied of its authenticity, they ordered the body of William Shaw to be cut down from the gibbet and given up to his friends with honour.
Case 2. The girl who poisoned her sister for 7 shillings. 1899. This case is one of the most unsettling we've covered. A young woman, barely out of girlhood, calmly devises a plan to murder her own sister, not in a moment of rage, not in desperation, but for money. And not a great fortune, not even enough to change her life, just enough to get married. She sends the weapon by post, a simple treat, a small cake delivered into an asylum ward, and within hours her sister is dead. But what makes this case truly disturbing is this. Almost everyone at the time asked the same question. Was Mary Ann Ansell a calculating murderer, or simply a foolish girl who never understood the consequences of what she had done? Because in Victorian England, that question could mean the difference between the gallows and mercy.
Historically, Mary Ann Hansell became the youngest woman to be hanged in private. Newspaper articles differ as to her age, a very common occurrence in newspapers, as we have seen in other cases. The reports ranged of her having been 18 or 22 years old. Mary Ann's sister, 26-year-old Caroline, was regularly referred to as her older sister. Mary Ann also had the distinction of being the last woman to be hanged in the 19th century in the United Kingdom. Background. Mary Ann came from a poor family. There were reported known incidents of mental illness in her family, although Mary Ann herself was judged only to be silly and always talking to herself by her mother. Mary Ann worked in service, as the great majority of women did in Victorian times. Mary Ann's older sister, Caroline Ansell, was an inmate at Leavesden Mental Asylum. Mental illness. In Victorian times, attitudes to mental illness were very different. The general policy was confine patients diagnosed with mental illness to large asylums, which were built all over the country. One such facility was Leavesden Mental Asylum, which had been built at Abbots Langley in Buckinghamshire by the Metropolitan Asylums Board to serve North London. Leavesden Mental Asylum was opened in 1870 to house quiet and harmless imbeciles and had over 1,500 patients, the majority of which, some 900, were women. It was in this facility that Mary Ann's sister, Caroline, was an inmate. About Mary Ann. Mary Ann, aged 18 or 22, worked as a maid to a wealthy household in Coram Street, in the then fashionable Bloomsbury area of London, and was engaged to a young man. Sadly, between Mary Ann and her fiancé, they were unable to afford the marriage, as they could not pool together enough money to pay for the marriage licence, a cost of 7 shillings and sixpence. As our regular listeners will know, insurance schemes and payouts had been in the news for quite some time. Mary Ann's idea, no doubt inspired by the many news stories of the time, was to insure her sister's life and then kill her to receive the payout and thereby obtain the money needed for the marriage licence, with some extra money to spare. From her research, she discovered that a life assurance policy on her sister, costing her 1 shilling and 5 pence a week, would net her £22, worth approximately £3,600 in 2023, on the death of her sister, and would easily resolve her monetary issues. The challenge was poisoning her sister in the insane asylum. Mary Ann devised the idea of baking a poisoned cake and sending it to her sister within Leavesden Mental Asylum. In this way, Mary Ann expected she would not be detected, as the fault would lay within the asylum. Accordingly, Mary Ann went to the local chemists, purchased a phosphorus-based rat poison, made the treat and sent it through to her sister at Ward 7 in Leavesden. Caroline, upon receiving the much-appreciated treat from her sister, decided to share it with her friends. Caroline ate the majority of the treat, but gave some to her friends as well. At this time there had been an outbreak of typhoid within the asylum, and the usual understaffed medical staff were pushed already. Caroline became severely unwell. The lag of her being seen due to the typhoid outbreak meant that doctors could do nothing for her when she was admitted into the infirmary, and Caroline died in severe pain. A post-mortem was conducted against Mary Ann's wishes, and phosphorus poisoning was found to be the cause of death. From here, it was easy to trace back to the remains of the treat, the postmark of the wrapping paper, and Mary Ann. Mary Ann was arrested by Superintendent Wood, where she vehemently denied any knowledge of the poison. "I know nothing whatever about it. I am as innocent a girl as ever was born," she stated to all who would hear her. When she was asked about the purchase of rat poison, she responded that she had purchased the poison to kill the rats in the wealthy residence in which she worked. The mistress of the house, Mrs. Mahoney, denied that her house had a vermin issue and confirmed that she had not asked Mary Ann to purchase the rat poison. Within the trial, many witnesses were called and the evidence was damning. A shop assistant testified as to Mary Ann purchasing the rat poison. Evidence was produced of the remains of the treat. The post-mortem confirmation of phosphorus poisoning evidence confirmed the manner of her sister's death, and Mary Ann continued to plead her innocence but had no convincing defence. The jury took 2 hours to find her guilty and did not make a recommendation to mercy, despite her age. She was sentenced to death and returned to St. Albans Prison, a prison with facilities for female prisoners, which had not had an execution since 1880. From the Croydon Guardian and Surrey County Gazette, July 1899. A poisoning mystery and the subsequent execution of Mary Ansell. The circumstances of the crime will be fresh in the memory of our readers. In September last, the prisoner was in the service of Mr. and Mrs. Mooney at 42 Great Coram Street, W.C. On September the 6th, Mary Ann insured her sister Caroline's life for £22 and 10 shillings. Earlier in the present year, the prisoner purchased at a shop near Great Coram Street 3 or 4 bottles of phosphorus paste, ostensibly to kill rats. On March the 9th, the deceased received a parcel bearing London W.C. postmark and containing a small, flat, yellow jam sandwich. The deceased, with 2 other inmates, ate the sandwich for tea, and all 3 fell ill. Caroline Ansell ultimately died in great agony from collapse. The prisoner wrote declining to allow a post-mortem examination to take place. 3 days after her sister's death, Mary Ann applied for the insurance money, which, however, was withheld. Inquiries were, meanwhile, made into the circumstances attending the girl's death, and the result was Mary Ann was arrested. She denied all knowledge of the poisoned cake, but the jury, after over 2 hours of deliberation, found her guilty of the crime, and Mr. Justice Matthew said that never in the course of his judicial experience had he had the misfortune to try a case in which so cold-blooded and revolting a crime had been committed to obtain so miserable an end. A confession. A starman writing from St. Albans says that he is informed by the governor of the jail that Mary Ansell has left behind a confession of her crime. The police commissioner has been interviewed by a press representative, and he had the opportunities of conversation with Mary Ansell before the death sentence was passed, and though reluctant to speak, he at length did so, and as he said, in the interests of truth. Candidly, he said, I do not think she was insane. In all my dealings with her, I have come to the conclusion that her demeanour was more sullen than anything else. I have seen the parents, and the father emphatically denies that there is insanity in the family. As to the murdered sister Caroline, the father said to the commissioner, according to the latter's statement, she was as right as you are until her brother was killed, and she then fretted so much that her mind gave way. Even though it seemed like a clear case of premeditated murder, there was considerable public agitation for a reprieve, possibly due to Mary's youth and family background. A resolution was passed by the Metropolitan Asylum Board urging for clemency for Mary Ann. Newspapers, such as the Daily Mail, also asked for a reprieve and tried to portray Mary Ann as the victim of society, a poor maidservant in service and its headline, "A One-Sided Investigation," complained that the Home Office had not made any effort to assess Mary Ann's mental state. Mary Ann's mother had told the press that she had been silly since the times she was at school, and that she sometimes talked to herself. However, Mary Ann's father denied that there was any mental illness within the family, including Mary Ann. 100 members of Parliament signed a petition on the day before she was due to die, calling for a week's postponement in carrying out the sentence while her mental state was determined. The Home Secretary, Sir Matthew White Ridley, remained unmoved, possibly due to the clear planning of the murder, and determined that the law must take its course. In a letter from the Home Office, it was stated that the Secretary of State, having carefully considered all circumstances of the case and having caused special medical inquiry to be made as to the convict's mental condition by Dr. D. Nicholson, visitor in lunacy, and Dr. R. Brain, superintendent of the Broadmoor Asylum, under Section 2 of the Criminal Lunatics Act of 1884, has been unable to find sufficient grounds to justify him in advising Her Majesty to interfere with the course of the law. The press were excluded from the event, so detailed reports of her execution are few. A crowd, estimated at around 2,000, had gathered at the main gate to see the black flag hoisted over the prison and the notice of execution posted. Some knelt silently in prayer at the appointed hour. From the Croydon Guardian and Surrey County Gazette, July 1899. Mary Ansell was executed in St Albans Jail on Wednesday morning for the murder of her sister, Caroline Ansell, aged 26, an inmate of Leavesden Asylum, Watford, by means of a poisoned cake conveyed to the deceased through the post. When she retired to bed on Tuesday night with the wardress watching over her, she rested well and rose refreshed at 6 o'clock in the morning under the care of her wardress. She washed and prepared for breakfast, but did not eat heartily. The prison chaplain was again in attendance upon her and remained with her from 7 o'clock to the end. The condemned girl walked quietly to the scaffold, attended by the chief wardress and Mr. Lloyd, the chief warden in charge of the prison, with the Reverend Henry H. Fowler, the aged prison chaplain, walking behind. The execution was private, but it was carried out in a satisfactory manner by Billington. The condemned girl seemed scarcely to realize even to the last that she would be hanged, and, though assured that all hope of a reprieve was useless, she held tenuously to the belief that one would be granted. It was only when the procession was actually formed that her last hope vanished, and she was in a condition of collapse when the bolt was drawn. Aftermath. Mary Ann's body was examined by the prison surgeon, Eustace Henry Lipscomb, who, as required by law, signed the death certificate. An inquest was held at 10 a.m., and the chief warder told the jury that Mary's death had been instantaneous and that her neck had been broken. Mary Ann was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison later in that day. A Home Office file made public in 2000 revealed that Mary Ann had confessed to sending Caroline the poison treat, as she thought that the death would not be investigated because her sister was in an asylum.
Case 3. The Children Who Kept Dying. The case of Betty Eccles from 1842. This case from 1842 is not a single murder, it is a pattern, a quiet domestic pattern that took years to be noticed, because in one small house in Bolton, children began to die, one after another, always suddenly, always violently ill, and almost always after a meal. At first, it was dismissed as misfortune, then coincidence, then something far darker. Because by the time suspicions were finally raised, this woman had buried not one child, not two, but almost her entire family. And what makes this case so chilling is this. There was no clear motive, no great inheritance, no obvious gain, just death, returning to the same household again and again.
Elizabeth Haslam, known as Betty, was a widow with children. Her husband had died relatively young, but no suspicion was entertained at the time that it had been anything other than a natural death. She claimed at one point to have had 10 children, but only one remained. In 1840, she had an unfortunate succession of deaths within her family, with the deaths of Hannah Haslam, 6 years, Anne Haslam, 4 years, and Richard Haslam, 16 months. Neighbours gossiped about the seeming curse on Betty, with whispers of suspicion, but no investigations took place. In January 1841, Betty, aged 38, married Henry Eccles, who had 3 children of his own. Due to some upset which is not detailed in reports, Mr. Eccles changes jobs and begins to work in Salford. Given the hefty commute, Mr. Eccles lives in Salford for the majority of the week, comes back for a day, and then commutes back. He is looking to eventually move his family there. Betty, alone in the house with children, is responsible for her own remaining child as well as Eccles's 3 children. The household includes William Eccles, 14, Richard Eccles, 12, Mary Eccles, 9, and Alice Haslam, 10. William and Richard work locally and hand their wages to Betty, which she uses to run the household. In September 1842, her own daughter Alice dies suddenly. The death is sudden and involves much purging and extreme pain before she passes. Betty claims to have attempted to get a doctor, but it was too late. The sad event occurred whilst Mr. Eccles was away at work. In October 1842, William, her eldest stepson, becomes exceedingly ill and dies. Questions are asked at this second unusual death within the household in a short span of time. Investigations begin into the antecedents of Betty, where her numerous unfortunate deaths with her family are discovered. An inquest is held on the body of previously healthy William Eccles, and as the inquest reviews all the initial collected evidence, what initially seemed a straightforward inquest into the death of 14-year-old William develops into a full-scale inquiry into multiple deaths and a possible serial killer. From the Evening Star, the 4th of October, 1842. Supposed murder of 10 persons by poison. A considerable degree of alarm and excitement was created in the neighbourhood of Foles, Little Bolton, on Thursday last, in consequence of an inquisition held at the Crown Inn upon the body of William Eccles, a boy of nearly 15 years of age, son of Henry Eccles, a carter, and who has hitherto borne an irreproachable character. The jury were at first summoned with an idea that it was an ordinary case of sudden death, but, from facts which afterwards transpired, the coroner deemed it necessary to have a post-mortem examination of the body, the result of which proved that there was a large quantity of arsenic in the bowels of the deceased. The evidence already given does not implicate any individual, but from inquiries made there is every reason to suppose that the deceased's stepmother has been guilty of the murder. It appears that Betty, then a widow, was married about 2 years ago to Henry Eccles, a carter, of respectable character, who was then in the service of a Mr. Hardcastle of Furwood, but was discharged in consequence of some faux pas on the part of his wife, and has since been working at Manchester. The family remained at Little Bolton. Shortly before her second marriage, she buried 2 daughters, one about 7 and the other about 9 years of age, within a fortnight of each other, and from the circumstance of their having died suddenly, it now suspected that they fell victims to her extraordinary and unaccountable predilection for poisoning. Her first husband also died suddenly, but having been unwell for some time previously, there was no suspicion of foul play, although it is now hinted that he did not die from natural causes. In fact, it is suspected that all her family, excepting those alive, have received a helping hand. She has been the mother of 10 children, and 8 of them have died suddenly. And if we add the stepson and the first husband, she may be supposed to have poisoned 10 persons. On Monday morning last, her present husband left home to attend to his work, and remarked, "Now, Betty, look to the children while I'm away, and in a week or 2 we'll remove to Manchester." She replied, "I always do look after them," and the man went away contented. Indeed, there was no reason for complaint as to harsh treatment on her part, but, on the contrary, she was always very kind to them, as far as appearances went. The following are the short particulars relative to the death of William Eccles, who was not her own child, but that of her husband by his marriage with another woman. On Monday morning last, the deceased 14-year-old William Eccles went to his work at the usual hour, and continued in good spirits to work until dinner time. When he returned from dinner, he complained of a great pain in his stomach and of being sick, at the same time vomiting a greenish fluid. He left work about 3 o'clock in consequence of being ill, and one of his fellow workmen, on going home upwards of an hour afterwards, found him lying on his back in a ditch, vomiting to a great degree, and, on being questioned, he complained of great pain in his stomach and bowels. He said he had had a plum dumpling for dinner. His fellow workmen lifted him up and supported him toward home, and on their way they met the deceased's stepmother. Deceased's companion requested her to take him home and give him something warm, and she replied that she would, as she had already made some tea. This evidence having been given, Mr. Taylor, the coroner, said it was clear the jury upon it could not come to any satisfactory conclusion, and he should therefore suggest the propriety of adjourning the inquiry until the body should be opened and the contents of the stomach analysed. This suggestion meeting with the concurrence of the jury, the inquest was adjourned until the following day.
The inquest was led by Alfred Swain Taylor, one of the preeminent forensic scientists in the pre and early Victorian times. Taylor's speciality was poisons, and he was regularly brought forward in murder trials as the medical expert. Taylor was known for his cleverness and wide breadth of knowledge, not one to let go of anything halfway. Once Taylor was involved, he was keen to ensure a full investigation. Taylor was reprimanded on more than one occasion for the great expenses incurred in his investigation, as he was a great believer in precise testing, usually done several times in order to ensure the accuracy of his results.
From the Evening Star, the 4th of October 1842. Supposed murder of 10 persons by poison. At the resumed inquest, the coroner said in opening the case that he had, in consequence of information which he had received, directed the body of another child to be examined, which, having been buried some time ago, had to be exhumed. This child was named Alice, and it was suspicious, from what the mother had said, that there had been something foul connected with her death. She, the mother, Betty Eccles, on being questioned, said that the deceased Alice had been attended by a doctor in her sickness, but she did not know his name or where he lived. Mr. Taylor said the testimony given by the medical gentlemen, Messrs. Denham and Howard, went to show that there was a large portion of arsenic in the stomachs of both bodies examined, and in that of the deceased, William Eccles, as much as would cover the face of a shilling. He, the coroner, would wish the inquest to be further adjourned till Tuesday in order that the evidence might be completed. This was compiled with, and the inquiry will take place in the police office in order to give the opportunity of the public attending on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock.
As the medical evidence comes in, more concerns of unexplained deaths arise requiring further exhumations. A troubling additional death outside of the home comes to light in addition to the now suspected 10 deaths associated with Betty. The rag and bone man Haywood made a deal of exchange of services for the care of his son, for goods she had purchased from him. 3 weeks later the child was dead. He never was paid for the goods, but instead found his healthy young son dead. Another interesting aspect to the case is Betty's assertions that some of her dead children are not hers. She strongly claims she never had a child named Anne, although inquiries confirm that she did.
Exhumation. Yesterday, the bodies of 3 other children were exhumed. The one was named Hannah Haslam, aged 6, and buried on the 9th of October 1840. The other, Anne Haslam, aged 4 years, buried the 3rd of December 1840, and the other, Richard Haslam, aged 16 months, buried on March 1840. The prisoner, Betty Eccles, for she is now in confinement, denies that she ever had a child named Anne. The prisoner in March last was nurse to a child of Mr. James Haywood of Bradshaw, which it is feared also met its death by poison. On the Saturday preceding the death of this child, the prisoner went to Mr. Haywood and requested him to let her have 2 flock beds, as she was desirous to take lodgers and wished to have this accommodation. Mr. Haywood told her to call on the following Monday, which she did, and she received the beds. And the condition was Payment was to be made for them out of what was given for nursing his child. On the following day the child died, and prisoner has not yet paid for the beds, and the presumption is she put the child out of the way to avoid payment. The arsenic purchase. About 5 or 6 weeks ago, the prisoner purchased a pennyworth of arsenic at the shop of Mr. Moscrop, druggist, Foles Road, alleging that it was for the purpose of poisoning mice. Mr. Moscrop, with laudable caution, at first refused to let the prisoner have the poison, and would not do so until she brought with her another person as witness. Prisoner left the shop and shortly returned with another woman, and Mr. Moscrop then supplied her with the arsenic, which he folded in 2 papers and wrote in legible characters on the cover, "Poison." A search has been made in the prisoner's house, but no arsenic has been found. Mr. Taylor has been exceedingly vigilant during the inquiries, and too much praise cannot be given to Mr. Inspector Harris for his exertions in finding out and furnishing information bearing upon the inquest. The bodies of the 2 children interred 2 years ago were exhumed yesterday, and the contents of their stomachs analysed by Mr. H. Watson, and we are informed that one of them was found to have been poisoned. The appearances in the other bespoke something of the kind, but no definite conclusion could be made upon the subject. We should suppose that there never was in this country such a wanton and cold-blooded number of murders without cause. She was not in distress, had not quarrelled with them, and, what is more, could not have done it for the sake of money, as they did not belong to any burial society.
Throughout the proceedings, Betty maintains an obstinate sullenness, often arguing points that can be clearly proven. She denies ever having a child named Anne, although this is easily proven. She denies having purchased arsenic from the chemist, although this can be confirmed by another in the shop. The inquest continues, taking on the form of a trial, as witness after witness is brought forward to either confirm the health before and after of one of the dead, or to confirm the results of extensive testing on the exhumed bodies. Although Dr. Taylor was a preeminent pathologist of the day, some of the corpses exhumed were so decomposed they were little more than sludge, making accurate testing nearly impossible. As the inquest progresses, the packed proceedings await the testimony of her husband, Henry Eccles.
From the Bolton Chronicle, the 8th of October, 1842, the adjourned inquest of the children poisoned, verdict of wilful murder in 3 cases. The adjournment inquest was held on Tuesday morning last at the police office in Boker's Row. The time announced for opening the investigation was 9 o'clock, but before that hour, such was the interest excited that the court was crowded to excess, and a large number were unable to gain attendance. The prisoner affected an air of indifference, and, during the examination that took place, did not appear to feel the least concern about it. The following evidence was given. Henry Eccles deposed, "I live at Turner Bridge, Little Bolton, and am a carter. I have lived there about 8 months. I first became acquainted with the prisoner in the latter part of the year 1840. Her name then was Betty Haslam, and she lived in Bradshaw Gate, and was a widow, and had 3 children, all daughters. The eldest was called Alice, another Hannah, but I do not know the name of the third." She remained a few weeks in Bradshaw Gate after I first became acquainted with her, and then removed into Mill Street in Little Bolton. The children she had at that time appeared very healthy. I had a dispute with her after having removed to the cellar in Mill Street, and did not go near her for a month. When I did go again, 2 of the youngest children were dead and buried. She told me the youngest died of measles, but did not say what the other had died of. I was informed that the oldest died first. I was married to her the first Sunday in 1841, but I do not recollect how long it was previously that the children died. When we were married, I took her to reside at the Buggett Hole in Tong. I was then working for Mr. James Hardcastle. I remained there until a little before Christmas, when I removed to the Folds in Little Bolton, and, shortly afterwards, to another house at Turner Bridge in the same neighbourhood. I left Mr. Hardcastle's employ some 9 weeks ago, and am now in the service of John and James Worrell, dyers in Salford. Since I went there, I have been in the habit of going the Monday morning, leaving my wife in charge of the family, and returning on the Saturday night. Shortly after going to reside at Turner Bridge, I remember my wife taking a child to nurse belonging to James Hayward of Bradshaw Gate. It was then about 10 months old. In the month of June last, I remember leaving the child well, and returned home about 4 o'clock on the following morning, and the child was dead. She did not tell me what it had died from. I remember Sunday the 4th of September, and that was the last day I saw my wife's daughter alive. She was then well and hearty. The last time I saw her was going to bed almost at 8 o'clock at night. I came home again the Saturday following, and Alice was then dead. My wife said that Alice was taken ill on the Tuesday night, and began to have fits, and died at 12:30 the Saturday at noon. She was buried on the Tuesday following. The last time I saw my son, William Eccles, alive was on the evening of last Sunday but one. I saw him go to bed, and he was then quite well and healthy. I went to my work on the Monday, and afterwards learnt that he was dead. I came home last Friday morning and found that it was so.
From here, witness after witness within the neighbourhood, as well as the children themselves, are asked to depose. Many of the testimonies overlap, confirming that they had witnessed the children healthy, and that the children died with much pain and vomiting within 24 hours of first becoming ill, suspiciously shortly after having eaten food prepared by Betty. One of the witnesses from Betty's earlier residence before she was married testifies to the beatings she would give her children.
Mart Fletcher deposed, in the latter part of the year 1840, I remember the prisoner, whose name was Betty Haslam, coming to reside in our neighbourhood. She had then 3 daughters, Hannah, the youngest, Mary, the next, and Alice, the eldest. I recollect the youngest being dead, and saw the funeral. Some time after that I saw another funeral. I had seen Hannah playing in the street the day before she died. On the Sunday after the funeral of Hannah, I went to the cellar window where the prisoner lived, on account of my attention being called by the beating of a child. She had given over beating the child then, and the prisoner was in bed, and the daughter Alice lay stripped upon the hearth, crying. I asked her how she could for shame to be beating it in that way, and had so lately buried the other. She replied that she would do as she liked with her children. She removed in 2 or 3 weeks after that.
Another repeated point from the many witnesses brought forward relayed the horrendous state of the dead bodies, specifically around the abdomen, as the children were washed, dressed, and laid out for their burial. In some cases, stating that the area was green in colour, whilst with other children, the area of the child's corpse is referring to as being black.
Margaret Bennison deposed, I am a widow and live in Great Bolton. In March last, I was applied to by James Haywood to furnish a funeral suit for a child. I made the suit and put it upon the child on the march, the day of which it was interred. The child was dirty about the mouth with what had come from the inside. I do not suppose the child had been very well cared for. It appeared to be a very lost child. The stomach was green, as if about to decay, and the lower down on the body was of a darker colour. I'd seen children in that way that have died from convulsions. I was present in the parish church on the Friday last, when the dead body of James Haywood's child was exhibited to view. I knew it to be the body of his child.
With establishment of the previous good health of the now dead children from several witnesses from Betty's previous and current residences, the next step is to prove her purchase of poison.
Richard Barlow deposed, I reside in Little Bolton and am an apprentice to Mr. Thomas Moscrop, druggist in Foles Road, Little Bolton. I have known the prisoner for 5 or 6 months. She has occasionally bought snuff and tea at the shop. She came to the shop about 5 or 6 weeks ago. I and her master and her were the only persons in the shop when she came. She said, I want a penny's worth of arsenic if you'll let me have it. Mr. Moscrop said, I cannot let you have it unless there is someone with you. It is the custom not to sell it without a witness. She said, I do not want to do any hurt with it. It is only for the mice. Mr. Moscrop, however, refused to let her have it, and she went away. In about half an hour afterwards, she came back and brought a female with her, but I do not know who the woman was. The prisoner, on coming in again, said, Will you let me have it now? An ounce of arsenic was then weighed to her. It was first wrapped in white paper on which was his address and labelled poison. A second paper was then wrapped around it and another label like this put upon it. The label was of dark and solemn character, with the death's head and the words arsenic, poison upon it. She then went away. I am sure she is the same person. I have no doubt at all that she is the same woman.
Medical testimony is produced confirming the testing done on the bodies, with the results being tested positive for arsenic by 3 different specialists. There is no question of the relatively large amount of arsenic found in the bodies. The last witness in the inquest trial is the Inspector of Police, James Harris.
James Harris, Inspector of Police, deposed, on the 28th of September, I went to the house of Henry Eccles and searched it. I found several things which I gave to Mr. Watson. On Thursday morning, the 29th, I took Betty Eccles into custody. I cautioned her, when I apprehended her, not to say anything which might convict her. I told her she was charged with having caused the death of 3 children with poison. I first asked her how long William Eccles had been sick. She stated that he ate his dinner heartily on Monday and then went to his work. and that he returned in the afternoon between 3 and 4 o'clock in a weakly state, and that she met him coming home, and he was then throwing up. I asked her if she had had any doctor, and she said she had called upon Dr. Mallet, but that he was not at home. She then said she gave William some senna and salts, but that he died in about 6 hours. I asked her how long Alice had been sick and what she had ailed from, and she said she was ill for 3 days and died at 12 o'clock at noon on the Saturday. I asked her about having a doctor to her, and she said she called once or twice upon Dr. Mallet and left word, but that Mr. Mallet did not come until Saturday, and the child had just died. I asked her if she ever had poison in the house for killing mice or any other vermin, and she said, to her knowledge, she never had a bit of poison in her life. I then mentioned Mr. Mosscrop to her and asked her if she had ever bought any arsenic from him, and she said she had not. That she had frequently bought snuff there, and a short time ago some poppies and laudanum mixture for a cough. On the following day I showed Mr. Mosscrop to her, and he said he had a faint recollection of her buying some, but that he would fetch his apprentice, and she stated distinctly to Mr. Mosscrop that she never did buy any poison from him. The apprentice was brought immediately after and identified her. I asked her how long she was a widow, but she did not state the number of months. I asked her how many children she had when a widow, and she gave me their names and ages. Hannah, 2 years of age, Richard, 16 months, and Alice. She denied ever having a child of the name of Nancy or of the name of Anne. She informed me that she was the mother of 10 children.
Although arsenic poisoning is suspected in the following cases of William Eccles, Alice Haslam, Nancy Haslam, Hannah Haslam, Richard Haslam, Anne Haslam, William Hatton Haywood, her first husband, and 3 other children who had also died, the jury is directed to focus their attention only on the case of William Eccles, Alice Haslam, and Nancy Haslam. The other bodies exhumed had been in a far too extended state of putrefaction to be reliably tested.
The prisoner was then requested to stand up, and the coroner said she was at liberty to state anything she thought proper, but that he would advise her not to say anything. She replied with an air of indifference, "I'll not say anything. I leave it to the court." The coroner then proceeded to sum up, stating that the consideration of the jury must be directed to the cases of William Eccles, Alice Haslam, and Nancy Haslam, and they must dismiss the others entirely from their minds. The jury consulted together for about 10 minutes, and then reported that they had agreed upon their verdict. They then consulted upon the other cases and immediately returned a verdict of wilful murder in each of the 3 cases named by the coroner. In the case of Haywood's child and the other girl, a verdict of sudden death, but by what means they came to their death there was no evidence to show was returned. The coroner then informed the prisoner that she stood committed for trial at the next Liverpool Assizes, and addressed her in very feeling terms, recommending her, whilst in prison, to pursue a different course of life to that she had hitherto done, and supposing even that she was innocent, which God and her own conscience alone knew, it would do her no harm but good, and if she were guilty, she would have every reason to make preparation for another and better world. At the conclusion, she turned round in a most impudent manner and said, "Thank you, gentlemen, for your kindness." The persons in court, on hearing this, gave one loud and almost general hoot. She was placed in a chaise and conveyed to the railway office, followed by a large crowd of persons who seemed disposed, could they have been permitted, to have dealt with her according to Lynch law.
Betty's trial is packed with spectators. The evidence from the inquest is brought forward again with further detail added. One of the most intriguing aspects of the whole trial was what could possibly have been her motive. Three possibilities arise. One is that young William, now deceased, had caught Betty indulging in drink and had stated he would tell his father. He never had the opportunity. The second possible motive that transpires is the inclusion in the factory insurance program. Both William and Richard worked there, and it would seem that she joined William to the burial club as well. But the payout was so minor as to be less than the wages that William brought in. The last possible motive that was put forward was that she had killed the Hayward child she nursed in order to not have to pay the debt she owed to his father. All in all, very small sums of money that were difficult to outweigh with the deaths of the children. She gained very little monetarily from their deaths.
One dramatic scene from the trial was when 9-year-old Mary gave evidence of Betty's unwillingness to visit the gravesite of the recently passed children, and Betty allegedly declined, stating she had other things on her mind. Betty jumped onto her feet in court and shouted, "You willful liar!" From the Eccles on the 8th of April, 1843, a woman convicted of murder. At the assizes at Liverpool on Tuesday, Betty Eccles was indicted for the wilful murder of William Eccles at Bolton by administering to him arsenic. Mr. Armstrong stated the case. The deceased, it appeared, was a lad of about 14 years of age, in the employment of Messrs. Eden and Thwaites at Bolton. The prisoner was his stepmother, and the family consisted of the prisoner, the deceased, his brother Richard and Mary Eccles, the two latter also stepchildren. The husband, Henry Eccles, was employed at Manchester, spending only the Sunday with his family. Several witnesses were examined, but the most material evidence was the following. Some time before the prisoner was drunk, and the deceased said, "He would tell his father," she replied, "if thou dost, I'll soon be shut of thee." She beat him sometimes. The house was not infested by rats or mice. He had never heard the prisoner complain of them. Alice Haslam died a fortnight before the deceased. John Turner, bookkeeper at the works of Messrs. Eden and Thwaites, said that the work people have a burial club amongst them for the people employed there. The deceased was a member of it, and about the 10th of September, the prisoner, Betty Eccles, called on the witness and asked for her burial money for her daughter by a former husband, Alice Haslam, who had just died. It was then explained to her that she was not entitled to such burial money, as her husband was not employed in the works, and the deceased, Alice, was not in the employment of Messrs. Eden and Thwaites. She came again on Tuesday the 27th of September for the burial money of William Eccles. Its amount was 50 shillings. The witness desired her to call again the next day, as he wished to make some inquiry about the matter, having seen the deceased apparently quite well the day before, and being struck by the fact of the second application for burial money coming so soon after the first. The prisoner was taken into custody in the afternoon of Thursday the 29th. Mr. Watson stated that he analysed the contents of the stomach. The white powder adhering to the coats was oxide of arsenic.
The defence stressed that any doubt as to his client's guilt required a not guilty verdict.
The verdict. From the Bolton Chronicle on the 8th of April 1843. Trial of Betty Eccles for the wilful murder of her children at Bolton. The learned judge summed up the evidence. The jury then retired, and after a nascence of an hour and a half, returned into court and pronounced the prisoner guilty. Silence having been proclaimed, his lordship put on the black cap and passed the awful sentence of death upon the prisoner. He stated, "The sentence upon you is that for the crime which you have committed and of which you have been found guilty, you be taken hence to the place of execution, that you then be hanged by your neck until you are dead, and that your body be taken down and buried within the precincts of the jail, on which you have been confined to after being taken from this court, and may the Lord have mercy upon your guilty soul." The prisoner heard her sentence with firmness, and at its conclusion she clasped her hands and exclaimed, "I ask for mercy, my lord." The judge responded, "Oh, that cannot be obtained." The prisoner stated, "Oh, mercy, my lord, if only you will have mercy upon me this time, my lord." The judge responded, "Take her down." The prisoner was then removed.
The execution. Public executions were still in place in 1843, and they tended to be an event. In this case, Betty was to be executed with another criminal, Wilmot Buckley. It was said that the public execution drew between 20 and 30,000 attendees.
From the Liverpool Chronicle, the 11th of May, 1843. The execution of Betty Eccles and Wilmot Buckley at Kirkdale. The execution of these unfortunate criminals, who were convicted at the last assizes, took place on Saturday at the north-west angle of Kirkdale Jail. The time fixed was 12, long before which the approaches to the scene of death were thronged with a gaping multitude. The female convict was tried for the murder of her stepson, a boy about 14 years of age, at Bolton, whom she had poisoned for the purpose of getting a trifling sum of money out of a burial club, and, from the disclosures on the trial, it was too clear that she had also poisoned 2 children of her own by her former husband. Buckley's offence belonged to a milder category, and the jury seemed strongly inclined to reduce it to the worst species of manslaughter. Even after they found him guilty of murder, they recommended him to the merciful consideration of the Crown. He cut his wife's throat in a field near St. Helens while they were taking a walk on a Sunday evening, she being at the time pregnant. But from his own confession after the act and other corroborative circumstances, it was evidently the impulse of a frantic moment, done in the heat of passion, and produced by the tantalizing upbraiding of his wife, who was jealous of her husband and viewed his attention to other females with distrust. At the execution, the Reverend Mr. Appleton read the burial service, and at the termination of which Buckley was led to the scaffold, where the rope was placed around his neck. During the process, the female prisoner remained in the chair, her eyes fixed intently on the awful preparations which the other criminal was undergoing. This completed, the executioner led her forward, and she rose without any seeming agitation and walked on, her lips moving in prayer. Mr. Appleton attended to the scaffold, still reading the service for the dead. At the close, the fatal bolt was withdrawn, and the prisoners, in a few seconds, ceased to exist. Buckley made a hearty breakfast, but the other wretched sufferer was unable to eat. Betty Eccles acknowledged that she had poisoned her stepson, but would not say, though she hardly denied, that she had disposed of the other 2 children in the same manner. The roads to and from the execution were densely crowded, and, from the number of persons in vehicles of every description, it resembled a visit to the racecourse on some attractive occasion. The number present we have heard variously estimated at between 20 and 30,000 persons.
Case 4. The McKay case, a son's brutal murder of his mother, true crime, from 1927. In October of 1927, a man rowing along the River Clyde made a discovery so shocking it would grip the entire city of Glasgow. Wrapped in a white sheet at the water's edge was what appeared to be the remains of a human body. Inside the bundle, a woman's head, battered beyond recognition, an arm, a thigh, and severed legs. There were signs the killer had even tried to burn the face. It was a crime of extraordinary brutality, but what stunned the public even more was who the police would soon arrest. Not a stranger, not a criminal of habit, but the victim's own son. In this episode, we examine the murder of Agnes Arbuckle, a quiet, well-respected widow, and the disturbing case against James McKay, a man described as intelligent, devoted, and yet capable, it was said, of unthinkable violence. We'll explore the background, the evidence, the trial, and the question that lingered long after the verdict. Was this cold-blooded murder or something far more complicated? Background. Agnes Arbuckle was a quiet, well-respected 70-year-old widow. She had married a second time. Her previous husband had been a Mr. McKay, now deceased. Mrs. Arbuckle had her own small house with a coal bunker where coal would be deposited, as was usual with houses at the time. Mrs. Arbuckle had some savings of approximately £80, value today of about £6,500, but she lived very cautiously off her pension of 10 shillings a week. Her house, it was commented upon by several, was well furnished with quality pieces and was kept scrupulously clean. Mrs. Arbuckle was house-proud. Mrs. Arbuckle had lost 2 of her sons in the war. She was known to have a very warm relationship with her remaining son, James McKay. James McKay. McKay equally was seen to have a very good relationship with his mother. They both lived in the same city, not so far from each other, and he visited her often. Certainly, all the neighbours recounted of how lovingly Mrs. Arbuckle spoke of her remaining son, James. McKay worked as a labourer, but there were several comments on how he did not fit the usual mode of a labourer. He was known to be educated and well read. McKay had been a prisoner in a German camp in 1918, an experience that would be stated to have greatly impacted him. Upon his release, McKay re-enlisted in the army and served in the army in India. Upon his leaving the army, McKay worked as a bricklayer's labourer. McKay was married with 2 children. His wife, to help support the family, worked as a cook in a boarding house in Rothesay, some 38 miles away, leaving McKay to raise the youngest son on his own. The long separation from his wife whilst caring for his young son was said to play upon his mind. The crime. On the 16th of October, a horrific discovery is made in the river. From the Daily Record, the 17th of October, 1927, River Clyde discovery reveals shocking crime. Victims, terrible injuries. Discovery in the river. The discovery of part of the woman's remains at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning by Mr. George Geddes of the Glasgow Royal Humane Society makes a dramatic story. Accompanied by a carpenter, he was rowing up the river to Polmadie Bridge, where some repair work was to be done. When about 130 yards beyond Govan Street Bridge, he noticed a white bundle at the water's edge on the north bank of the river. He pulled into the bank and leaned out of the boat to examine the bundle, which was about 2 feet long by about 18 inches broad, and it was wrapped in a white bedsheet. It was tied with a length of clothes rope. Pulling aside the cord, he opened one end of the bundle. In the course of his work in recovering bodies from the river, Mr. Geddes had seen many a grim sight, but never, he confessed, had he met with anything so shocking as this. For the object which met his horrified gaze was the face of a woman, battered almost beyond recognition. Hastily covering the face again, Mr. Geddes lifted the bundle into the boat, rowed back to his house some distance down the river, and immediately telephoned to the police. Bundle's grisly contents. Within a few minutes, detective officers were examining the bundle, which revealed a woman's head, 2 legs cut off from below the knee, a thigh, and a left arm and hand. These members had apparently been suffered cleanly from the body with a saw, and the 3rd finger, which was missing from the hand, had been removed in the same manner. After a hurried glance at the contents, the detectives took the bundle to the Central Police Office, where, on a closer examination, the missing finger was found, and on it a faint circular impression, such as might be left by a tightly fitting ring, was discernible. The remains had been wrapped first in thin brown tissue paper, 11 sheets of which had been used. The bundle also contained a length of blue and white shirt line, about a yard long, and part of a woman's apron, which had been used as additional wrapping, and the white bedsheet formed the outer covering of the gruesome package. Terrible injuries. So terribly shattered was the face and head that only a person intimately acquainted with the unfortunate victim would be able to recognize her. There were also several gashes on the forehead and a deep slanting wound stretching across the nose and part of the cheek. This had the appearance of having been inflicted with a hatchet or some similar weapon, and it had the effect of forcing the face inwards to some extent. A deep gash on the right cheek extended to the corner of the mouth, caused one side of the lower lip to drop pendulously towards the chin, giving the impression at the earlier examinations that the tongue protruded terribly, as in the case of a strangled person. One eye seems to have been blackened, and the other was protuberant and staring. The face in the vicinity of the left ear was blistered, and the hair was scorched. There were several severe wounds in the back of the head, these injuries were undoubtedly sufficient to cause death. On the riverbank, several yards above where the bundle had been discovered, was found a pink flannelette bed cover with several white stripes at either end, and it seemed probable that this was used by the murderer to carry his ghastly burden to the water's edge. Apart from this, the police, when they arrived on the scene, found little of apparent importance. They did indeed make one discovery which may prove of value. In the mud at the edge of the river near where the bundle was found was a fairly clear footprint, and others were found further up the bank. Of these, the police took photographs and 3 wax impressions. Here again, there was a baffling absence of significant peculiarity. It was fairly evident that the bundle was placed at the riverside only a few hours before it was found by Miss de Geddes. At the spot where it lay, the bundle would have been submerged when the river reached its highest level. This occurs between 3 and 5 a.m., and as the bundle was found at 8 a.m. and it was not wholly wet, it must obviously have been put there after 5 a.m. It is pure coincidence that the gruesome package was actually found in the river, unusually due to work taking place on the bridge. The water levels had been lowered. Police, hoping to find the remaining body parts of the corpse, dragged the river. The body itself has been horrifically mutilated, with what would appear to be an attempt to burn the head. The ring finger has been cut off, no doubt to hide an identifiable ring that would not loosen. From the Daily Record, the 17th of October, 1927. River Clyde discovery reveals shocking crime. Strange coincidence. It must have been the intention of the murderer, or whoever placed the remains there, to throw the bundle into deep water, but this object, which might at any other time have succeeded, was defeated on this occasion by a strange coincidence. The level of the water is controlled by the weir gate at Albert Bridge, and in order to facilitate some repair work at one of the bridges on Saturday, the water had been lowered some 18 inches below normal. But for this, it is possible that the remains might not have been discovered so soon. The river was dragged on Saturday for the trunk and other parts of the body, and yesterday, before the remains were discovered, the water was drawn off to the greatest possible extent, in order that a thorough search might be made. The spot chosen for the concealment of the remains suggests that the act was committed by someone well acquainted with the district, for it was one of the least frequented of that part of the river. At this point, some 130 yards from Govan Street Bridge, the roadway skirting Glasgow Green is fenced off from the river by an iron railing about 4 feet high, on the other side of which a grassy bank slopes steeply down to the water's edge. Deliberate mutilation. Although the woman's terrible injuries suggest that she had been battered to death by some person in a blind rage, it's quite probable, on the other hand, that the mutilation of the face was deliberately done to prevent identification. Weight is lent to this theory by the fact that the disposal of the remains was planned and carried out with calculated brutality and cunning. From the suffering of the third finger of the left hand, it may be concluded that the object was to remove a ring which might have fitted tightly, or the severing of the finger would have been unnecessary. A working-class woman would not be likely to possess a ring of such value as to offer incitement to such a brutal act, and the inference is therefore that the ring might have been a means of identification having perhaps initials inscribed on the inner surface, as is commonly the case in wedding rings. The singeing of the face of the woman might have been the result of a tentative attempt to dispose of the remains or to disfigure the face, but it is more probable that the burning was caused by the woman's falling or having been thrown against the fireplace. As the gruesome finding of the body and the description of the victim is splashed across all of the papers, two women begin to question whether it might be Agnes Arbuckle. Agnes had been away for some 2 weeks, but her loving son, James McKay, had explained that she was moving away to take a small apartment for herself elsewhere, and thereby kindly donating her own house to her son, James McKay, and his family. Interestingly, McKay's own wife questions whether the horrific mutilated body found is that of her own mother-in-law. From the Daily Record, the 11th of October, 1927, Glasgow murder arrest. Clyde discovery reveals shocking crime. Victims, terrible injuries. The young woman who accompanied the McKays when they came to Arbuckle House on Saturday night said that she understood that the dead woman was away from home, and she was, therefore, surprised to see Mrs. Arbuckle's spectacles and slippers in the house. She thought it strange, she said, that the old woman should have gone away without these articles. She was still more puzzled when she saw Mrs. Arbuckle's purse in the kitchen. The victim. The deceased woman is described as being of rather a superior type. She was of a reserved but kindly disposition. In appearance, she was thin, but was fresh complexioned and well preserved, and looked considerably less than her 70 years. She had an excellent set of artificial teeth. They were not in her mouth when the head was found in the bundle on the riverbank. She took a keen pride in her house, which was much better furnished than the general run of houses in that locality. Despite her modest means, she was always anxious to assist those who knew her, especially her son, of whom, in her neighbour's words, she thought the world. Suspicious, McKay's wife approaches the police and is able to identify her own mother-in-law. James McKay, son of murder victim Agnes Arbuckle, is remanded for questioning. The police begin to comb through her house, and there they find the missing body parts of the murdered victim, Agnes Arbuckle. From the Daily Mirror, the 17th of October, 1927. Body in a parcel, man arrested, charged with murder of his mother at Glasgow. Missing remains found in coal shed of house. There was a dramatic sequel at Glasgow yesterday to the discovery of the dismembered body of a woman on the banks of the River Clyde. Detectives last evening arrested James McKay, a bricklayer, aged about 35, a son of the dead woman. McKay was charged with the murder of his mother and will be brought before the stipendiary today. His arrest followed the identification of the remains as those of Mrs. Arbuckle. She lived in Main Street and disappeared about 10 days ago. Missing parts of her body were found in a coal bunker in her house. The dissimilarity in the names is occurred by the fact that Mrs. Arbuckle was twice married. The woman was identified by the accused man's wife. Carried through the streets. It is thought that the bundle was deposited in the water at a recent date. Police believe that the remains were carried through the streets in an outer covering consisting of a blanket, as one was later found on the bank of the river a short distance away. It is supposed that the carrier dropped the blanket in his hurry to get away. A Bridgeton resident informing the police that on Friday evening he saw a man of the labouring type in London Road heading in the direction of Glasgow Green and staggering along under the load of a heavy sack. As police continue their investigations, McKay is brought before the court for the official declaration of the crime he is alleged to have committed. From the Daily Record, the 18th of October, 1927, cut up body. Glasgow suspects dazed looks in court. James McKay, the Glasgow man who was in custody on the charge of having murdered his mother, part of whose remains were found tied in a bundle on the north bank of the River Clyde on Saturday morning, and the remainder in a coal bunker in her house at 213 Main Street, Gorbals, on Sunday, was brought before the stipendiary magistrate, Mr. George Smith, yesterday. Small groups of people gathered outside in the street, and the courtroom was filled mostly with police officials and constables, when McKay, a strongly built man of about 40, who looked somewhat dazed, as if he had just been aroused from sleep, was led in. The blue suit which he had worn when arrested had been removed, and he was dressed in a grey shirt and dark trousers, and he had no shoes, showed no emotion. McKay looked straight in front of him and showed no emotion as he was charged with having between September the 27th, 1927 and October the 15th, 1927, both dates inclusive, in a house occupied by Agnes Arbuckle at 213 Main Street, South Side in Glasgow, assaulted the said Agnes Arbuckle, his mother, and did murder her. The inquest takes place where James McKay is found guilty of the murder of his mother. James McKay will go to trial. The trial takes place some 2 months later in December 1927. Investigators have been busy looking into the backstory and the events that led up to the brutal murder and mutilation of his mother, Agnes Arbuckle. From the Daily Record, the 13th of December 1927, Glasgow trial, son charged with murder of mother, the house of death, grim visit after head had been found in the Clyde. One of the most sensational murder trials in recent years opened the Glasgow High Court yesterday when James McKay, son of Mrs. Agnes Arbuckle, parts of whose dismembered body were found in the River Clyde at Glasgow Green on Saturday, October 15th, was charged with murdering his mother. The remainder of the woman's body, it will be recalled, was found in the coal bunker of her house at 213 Main Street, Gorbals in Glasgow, on the following day. Accused smart appearance. The charge against James McKay, a son of Mrs. Arbuckle by her first marriage, was that between September the 27th and October 16th, in a house at 213 Main Street, South Side in Glasgow, then occupied by his mother, the now deceased Agnes Arbuckle, he did assault her and cut her on the face, neck, chest and thigh with a sharp instrument and did murder her. He was also charged with robbing her of a bank book, a sideboard, 2 easy chairs, 4 small chairs, a couch, an overmantel, a sewing machine, 4 pictures, a lamp, 4 ornaments, 2 flower pots, an inkstand, a light pendant, 2 globes, a grate, hearth tiles, a curb, and a rug, and a carpet runner, and a doormat. McKay appeared in the court in a rough brown tweed suit and a blue shirt similar to those commonly worn by working men. Despite the fact that he was collarless, he looked very smart, and his appearance generally bore out the testimony of several witnesses who spoke of him as a man of good intelligence. The case may last about 3 days, and the jury will be detained overnight by the Crown authorities until the trial is over. In the jury, there are several women. The case begins with Mrs. Arbuckle's next-door neighbour's evidence. She confirms that on the 30th of September, McKay asked to borrow the key to his mother's house, stating that she had gone out and forgotten her key. Later, the same evening, he returned and stated that his mother had gone on holiday to Rothesay, some 40 miles away. He requested to collect his mother's letters while she was away. And 2 weeks later, she saw furniture being taken out of Mrs. Arbuckle's house by movers. From the Daily Record, the 13th of December 1927, Glasgow trial, day of discovery. The accused, James McKay, on the forenoon of October 15th, the day on which the body was found in the Clyde, told the witness that his mother, his wife and children had come up from Rothesay that night to live in the house, and that he had to go to the central station to meet them. He also said his mother intended to move into a single apartment house. That night, McKay called at the house with his wife and another lady. Identified the head. The next day at the Central Police Court, the witness identified Mrs. Arbuckle's head, and later at premises in Gorbals. She identified furniture which had been formerly seen in Mrs. Arbuckle's house. She had never seen the accused drunk until after September the 30th. A post office clerkess said the last time Mrs. Arbuckle lifted her pension was on September the 28th. The next witness called lived next door to the McKays for some 10 years and recounts how, in general, James McKay was not a drinker. That all changed on the 21st. She saw him selling off his furniture, allegedly to help pay his debts. Concerned, she went to McKay's mother, Mrs. Arbuckle, to tell her of the apparent difficulties she saw with her son and neighbour, James McKay. From the Daily Record, the 13th of December, 1927, Glasgow trial. Son charged with the murder of her mother. Mrs. Emily Micklejohn said that she lived next door to the accused McKay and his wife since 1917. McKay, she said, was a prisoner in Germany until 1918, and after that he re-enlisted and went to India. When he left the army, he worked as a bricklayer's labourer. During the last 2 summers, said the witness, McKay's wife had been employed as a cook in a boarding house in Rothesay, and the accused was left at home with the 2 children. The witness on September the 21st found him drinking and selling off his furniture, and, as she thought he was going off his head, she went round and saw Mrs. Arbuckle, his mother. Staring eyes. Mrs. Arbuckle came round and saw him next day, and after she went away, he sent for her, the witness, and asked what she meant by worrying his mother. He was very angry and seized her arms and twisted them. His eyes were staring out of his head. Afterwards, he apologized for what he had done, and later he told her about a ledger that had come into his hands. His little son, he said, had picked it up in the fragments from the fireplace, and he pieced it together and read it. It was from his wife to her sister, and in it his wife explained that after she was finished with her job at Rothesay, she was going down to Dumfries for the winter. The accused, said the witness, was worried because he was going to be left alone at home with his little boy. At about 9 o'clock on the night of Wednesday, September the 28th, said witness, McKay was mad drunk. Mother's bank book. On Saturday, October the 1st, when she next saw him, he was well dressed. He had on the suit which he said his mother had redeemed from pawn for him. He also wore a new hat, a new pullover, and a new shirt. She saw him every day between then and the date of his arrest. When he came home into her house on the evening of October the 12th, he was rather drunk and held up a buff-coloured book and said, "This is my mother's bank book. She's given it to me." He said his mother had gone to stay with a niece in Blantyre and was going to leave her house to him and his wife, who was coming up on the Saturday. His mother, he also said, had taken some furniture with her and was going to go into a single-end house on October the 28th. And on that occasion, he asked the witness to take charge of this little boy, and she did so. Book full of notes. The following night he came with the boy. He was quite sober and took out a pocket book full of notes and gave the witness a 10-shilling note. The witness asked him where he got the money, and he replied, "I got it." "Where did you get it?" asked the witness again, and the accused replies, "Never you mind, I've got it, and I'm going to get £60 tomorrow, approximate value £6,000 in 2025. He then took the 10 shillings back and put down 4 half-crowns. Later that night he came in again and said he was going to Carntine. Accused's muddy shoes. At 10 minutes to 6 on the morning of Friday, October the 14th, said the witness, the accused came to her house in a condition which she described as wild. His hair was standing on end, his eyes were staring out, and his hands were dirty. His clothing was dirty, and his shoes were very muddy. His explanation was that he had been drunk and had slept the night in a club hut, but, said the witness, he looked as if he'd slept out all night and had been through a ploughed field. He asked the witness to get his son ready so that he might take him down to Rothesay, leaving by the 7 o'clock train. On the evening of October the 15th, the witness met Mrs. McKay, who had returned from Rothesay, and Mrs. McKay came to her house. The muddy shoes are significant, and, indeed, they are a perfect match for the wax casts that have been made of the shoe prints near the river bank where the bundle was found. The evidence is brought forward of the terrible suspicions of Mrs. McKay that her husband may have been involved in the murder and mutilation of his mother. The wife's dramatic words. Mrs. Meiklejohn said that on the Sunday she read in the Sunday Mail that parts of a woman's body had been found in the Clyde on Saturday morning. Mrs. McKay, the wife of the accused, asked her about midday on the Sunday if she had seen the report of the finding of the body, and she replied that she had just glanced at it. Then Mrs. McKay said, "Do you know, Emily, I think that is Jim's mother." Mrs. Meiklejohn said she told Mrs. McKay not to be silly and laughed at her. She also told her it was an awful thing to say. Mrs. McKay wanted her to go with her to the police office, but she refused. Later that day, she saw McKay leaving the close in the custody of detectives. Well-read labourer. Mrs. Meiklejohn said Mr. McKay was very intelligent and a well-read man. He was strange at times. His treatment while a prisoner in Germany seems to have affected him. Of his mother he was very fond, and she was fond of him. He would not hear anyone say a word against her. On one occasion, after his son had found the ledger in the fireplace, he told the witness he thought his mind was going. 3 people who had employed McKay as a builder's labourer described him as a man of extraordinary intelligence to be a labourer. At times he was morose, and always he was reserved and quiet. The accused left his employment on the morning of September the 28th after saying he had had some domestic trouble. The case closes for the prosecution. The defence with such a preponderance of evidence against McKay, responds with temporary insanity partially brought on by his time as a prisoner of war. The defence contention was that his mother had died a natural death, in panic brought on by his drinking and his previous experiences as a prisoner of war in a German prison camp. He panicked and cut up the body to dispose of it. The defence continued that McKay was in a strange state at the time. The defence stated that his strange state was self-evident given that known warm relationship with McKay had with his mother. The prosecution counter-argument is acerbic. From the Daily Record, the 15th of December, 1927. Crown Counsel's speech. The Advocate Deputy, in his address to the jury, described as untenable a suggestion by the defence that the wounds on the woman's head and face had been inflicted after death. Why, he asked, would anybody cut up the body and dispose of it secretly if the woman had died a natural death? At the time the body had been lying in the coal bunker, the accused had been representing that his mother was alive. On September the 30th, he told Mrs. Torrance that his mother had gone to Rothesay. Later, he was telling Mrs. MacArthur every day that his mother was unwell. Stood to gain £100. On the 4th of October, McKay said he was going to sleep in his mother's house because his mother was unwell and he was going to nurse her at night. Then he said his mother was going to Blantyre, and he told a witness that his mother was an old woman and in her dotage, while all the time the woman was lying dead in the house. The motive for the crime was clear. The old lady had £83 in the bank and a number of insurance policies, while the accused had taken out a policy for £15 on her life, valued today approximately £1,200. He was the only son, and therefore he stood to benefit to the extent of upwards of £100 by his mother's death, value approximately £8,000 in 2025. There was evidence to show that at the time the accused was hard up, his rent was in arrears, and he owed money to a moneylender. Not due to temper. When he was arrested, there were found on him documents which showed that he had been practicing his mother's handwriting simply to produce an order that would induce the bank to pay him £40. Everybody who had examined the accused saw nothing to suggest that he was insane. There was no evidence to be found that the deed was done in a fit of temper. If this woman had died as a result of injuries to the head and nothing more had happened, there might have been some force in that suggestion, but they had to look at what had happened afterwards. Hawking the teeth. The body was cut up. That was the work of hours. It had not been done on the spur of the moment. It had been done with deliberation and cold blood. Ladies and gentlemen, said counsel, I put it to you. Could a man who is fond of his mother cut up that body over a space of 2 hours? Could a man who is fond of his mother, days after she had died, hawk about the town a set of false teeth? He asked for a verdict of guilty. A different explanation of the tragedy was suggested by counsel for the prisoner in his address to the jury. Assume, he said, that the accused did cut up the body. This man, we're told, was drinking heavily at the time. Suppose he finds his mother dead when he's in the state of a drunken frenzy. He doesn't know what to do. He feels that he may be suspected of causing her death. He would say, I'm afraid to tell anybody. I'm afraid to go to the police. I must hide the body. Cutting it up and hiding the body would not be murder, said counsel. It was incredible that a man who was fond of his mother would have murdered her. It doesn't take long for the jury to find James McKay guilty of the murder and mutilation of his mother. From the Daily Record, the 15th of December, 1927. Dramatic scene at close of Glasgow murder trial. Shout from the dock. Condemned man's cry of "Cheer up!" Glasgow trial ends. Women weep while judge passes death sentence. After deliberating for 20 minutes, the jury in Glasgow High Court yesterday afternoon returned a unanimous verdict of guilty against James McKay, who was charged with murdering his mother, Mrs. Agnes Arbuckle, in her house at 213 Main Street in Glasgow. Lord Ormidale then passed sentence of death. Sensational end to the trial. Several jurywomen in tears. Several women in the jury wept as his lordship addressed the accused in quite solemn tones before passing sentence, and a woman in a seat near the dark sobbed bitterly. McKay looked straight in front while the judge spoke. He was pale, but outwardly calm, and when this lordship had finished, the prisoner turned sharply and ran downstairs to the cells. As he disappeared, a woman in the court sobbed, "Oh, Jimmy," and he turned to her and said, "Cheer up." So ended a trial as sensational as the crime which came to light on the morning of Saturday, October the 15th, when part of the woman's dismembered remains were found in the River Clyde at Glasgow Green. The next day, after McKay had been arrested, the remainder of the body was found in the coal bunker in the woman's house. Features inscrutable. McKay's face was pale and sat when he re-entered the dock to hear the jury's verdict. The foreman, in reply to the question of the clerk of the court, said quietly, "Guilty as libelled." The verdict, he said, was unanimous. The brief silence while the clerk records the verdict is one of the most harrowing episodes in murder trials. When the foreman had agreed that the verdict as recorded was correct, his lordship called on the accused, who stood up with one hand on the rail of the dock and looked straight in front. He was very pale, but his features were inscrutable. Attempts are made to have the death sentence commuted to imprisonment, with mental health issues stating as a mitigating factor. The appeals are rejected. And on the 24th of January 1928, James McKay is executed. Case 5. The Pearson poisoning. The murder of Alice Pearson. True crime from 1905. In this case, we are in Amar Island in 1905. A man sits in a prison cell awaiting his fate. He has already been convicted of a serious crime, and yet what he is about to say will shock even the authorities. He claims that his mother, who died months earlier and was quietly buried, was murdered. Not only that, he accuses his own wife and his own sister. At first, the story is dismissed. Some say he dreamt it. Others believe he is lying to save himself. But in a rare act of due diligence, officials order the body to be exhumed. And what they discover inside the remains will turn a dismissed claim into one of the most astonishing poisoning cases of the Edwardian era. Because within the body of a 74-year-old woman, they find not one poison, but two. Large quantities of metallic mercury and deadly strychnine. This is the story of a family greed, quiet resentment, and a murder that nearly stayed buried.
The family members. Alice Pearson, aged 74, is the matriarch of the family, with savings of an equivalent value of £15,000 in 2024. Isaac Pearson, her son, Sarah Ann Pearson, her son's wife and her daughter-in-law, and Agnes Aggie Black, her married daughter. About Alice Pearson. Alice Pearson, in her retirement, had her son, daughter, and their respective spouses move in with her. Unfortunately, family tensions arose, leading to conflicts between Alice and her children, Isaac and Agnes, and with her daughter-in-law, Sarah Ann. Despite having some savings, Alice's children swiftly depleted Alice's money. In a questionable move, her daughter Agnes took out life insurance on her mother for the substantial amount of £8, 14 shillings, worth a little over £1,000 in 2024, with Agnes set to receive this sum in the event of Alice's demise. In June 1904, Alice, at the age of 74, suddenly dies from extreme convulsions after having eaten a hearty meal that had been prepared for her by Sarah Ann, wife of her son Isaac Pearson. Alice dies painfully. All of the neighbours comment on the strange suddenness of her death, but no further action is taken, mostly due to her advanced age. With her burial and no questions asked from the authorities, everything quietens down. Sarah Ann leaves Isaac and emigrates to Canada. Agnes Black, Alice's daughter, moves to England. And on the 7th of December 1904, Pearson, Alice's son, is indicted for violating a girl. From the Irish News and Belfast Morning News on the 7th of December 1904, Portadown case. Isaac Pearson was indicted for committing an offence against a girl named Mary McAladian near Portadown on the 28th July last. The jury found the prisoner guilty of an attempted offence and assault. Sitting in his cell whilst awaiting his trial, Isaac considers his limited options. One news report wrote that Isaac approached the magistrates stating that he had had a dream that his mother had been killed by his wife and sister. Other news reports state that the dream sequence was nonsense and that he had directly approached the governor offering information about the murder of his mother some 6 months prior. Isaac's information is treated with skepticism by the authorities, possibly motivated by an attempt to limit the harshness of his sentencing coupled with revenge at his wife for leaving him. However, in a due diligence kind of way, the body of Isaac's mother is exhumed for testing. From the Irish News and Belfast Morning News, the 15th of November 1904, analysts report not yet made, an absurd rumour. It is not thought probable that an inquest will be held on the remains of Mrs. Pearson, whose body was exhumed a few days ago in consequence of a statement made by her son, at present in Armagh jail, awaiting trial on charge of criminal assault, to the effect that his mother died from the effects of poison administered, as he alleged, by his wife Alice Pearson, who is now in America. The authorities have not yet received the report of Professor Berkeley, to whom the viscera of the deceased woman was forwarded for analysis. The true version of the alleged murder cannot, therefore, be known until the police adduce the evidence which they have collected at the magisterial investigation, but before that can take place, it will be necessary for the constabulary to get into their custody one or perhaps two persons who would appear to be implicated and who are not at present within the jurisdiction. There is absolutely no truth in the absurd statement circulated in an evening newspaper that the prisoner, Isaac Pearson, had given the secret away in a dream. The fact is that he intimated to prison officials that he desired to make a confession and asked to see a magistrate. District Inspector Cottingham from Portadown, who has charge of the case and who, with Head Constable Devon, has been vigorously prosecuting inquiries for time, was appraised of this and afterwards attended at the jail and took the man's statement. Pearson has a sister who is supposed to be living in England. However, to everyone's surprise, with analysis done on Alice's exhumed body, large quantities of both metallic mercury and strychnine are found. The metallic mercury would not have killed Alice, but it would have given her stomach and bowel issues. The strychnine, on the other hand, could easily have killed several people. From the Irish News and Belfast Morning News on the 19th of November 1904, the Portadown poisoning case, result of the analysis. Unless a special order is given by the Irish government, it is not intended to hold an inquest on the remains of Mrs. Pearson, whose body was exhumed some days ago in consequence of an allegation that she had died from the effects of poison administered by her daughter-in-law. This serious charge was preferred by the deceased's son, Isaac, against his wife, Sarah Ann Pearson, who is at present in Canada. As already reported, Isaac Pearson is confined in the county jail awaiting trial on the charge of criminal assault. That the late Mrs. Pearson died from the effects of an irritant poison, there is now not the shadow of doubt, for Mr. Robert Barclay of Belfast, who analysed the stomach, found it very considerably full of metallic mercury together with traces of strychnine. The truth or falsity of the prisoner's allegation that the poison was administered by his wife is, of course, a matter that has to be proven. It is expected that it will be some considerable time before the police will be in possession and position to place the evidence which they have collected before the magistrates. It will be first necessary for them to get into their custody one or two persons, but before that can be accomplished, certain rules and regulations will have to be complied with. In the meantime, it is expected that the authorities will here have made arrangements for having the suspected persons kept under investigation and observation. With a murder investigation underway and two suspects in different international locations, efforts are made to find both Sarah Ann, the daughter-in-law, and Aggie, the daughter. Police investigators are sent to Canada and England to attempt to capture the two suspects and bring them back to Armagh for trial. Sarah Ann, with collected evidence weighing most heavily against her, is brought to trial first, with the daughter, Agnes Black, attending the whole of the proceedings. From the Irish News and Belfast Morning News, the 20th February 1905, the Rich Hill poisoning case, magisterial investigation, serious charges against relatives, sensational evidence. The proceedings in connection with the Rich Hill poisoning mystery were opened at Armagh on Saturday, when two women, daughter-in-law and daughter, accused of the alleged murder of old Mrs. Pearson at Mullaleash on June the 27th last, were brought up at the courthouse and charged with the crime. The story of the murder was told to the prison officials while Isaac Pearson, son of the deceased, was in Armagh jail awaiting trial for assaulting upon a woman, for which at the winter assizes in Belfast he was sentenced to 15 months imprisonment. Agnes Black
daughter of the deceased, was arrested at Wallsend Police Office on the 15th of December. On the journey across to Ireland, she is alleged to have made important statements to the officer in whose custody she was, which led to further inquiries from which serious developments are expected. Mrs. Black, who, during her imprisonment under remand in Armagh Jail, has given birth to a child, denies any complicity in the crime and declares that she was hurried away from her mother's house on the day that she met her sudden death. Mrs. Alice Pearson, deceased, complained that day that her dinner was bitter and died shortly after the meal, but owing to her advanced age, death was attributed to natural causes. There was some talk amongst the neighbours afterwards, and suspicions of an unnatural death were freely spoken of, but until the confession of Pearson in prison, there was no direct evidence upon which the police could base any charge. When the body was exhumed and the viscera was analysed by Professor Berkeley of Belfast, a considerable quantity of metallic mercury and strychnine were discovered, the purpose of which has since been investigated by the police with successful result. Isaac Pearson, who is still in jail undergoing the sentence imposed upon him by Judge Wright, will not be called as a witness in view of the fact that his wife and sister are incriminated. It appears that on the voyage from Canada to Derry, Mrs. Pearson made statements to Sergeant Richardson, the officer who received her into custody under the extradition warrant. But the nature of this has not yet been disclosed. It is believed, however, to have an important bearing on the case. The two prisoners were separately conveyed from Armagh Jail to the courthouse in Abroham. Mrs. Black arrived first, followed shortly afterwards by her sister-in-law, Mrs. Pearson. A large crowd had assembled in the vicinity of the Hall of Justice to witness the arrival of the accused. The first incident of interest at the sitting of the court was the identification by a druggist of one of the accused, who purchased poison from him. After a careful survey in the court, he pointed to Mrs. Pearson, who was attired in black and sat in the barrister's bench, accompanied by a number of other women, including Agnes Black, all wearing dark costumes. Mr. Belford, the clerk of the court, having read the charge, the evidence was ready by Mr. Monroe for the Crown. Mrs. Pearson was evidently labouring under a great agitation and followed the course of the case with the keenest interest. A pathetic figure was the other prisoner, Mrs. Black, who fondled her newly born babe in her arms. Several witnesses are brought forward attesting to Alice Pearson's general robust health at the time of her unexpected death, despite her advanced years. Also of the known fractious relationship within the family and the easy spending ways of both children. Testimony is given regarding an increase in diarrhea that Alice had commented upon to her friends. This would be the expected result from poisoning by metallic mercury, which probably would not kill you, but would certainly impact the body. There was a considerable amount of metallic mercury in Alice's body, giving the impression that attempts had been made to poison her slowly. More witnesses are produced who had been by Alice when she died and had seen the convulsive torment she underwent before her death, shortly after the heavy meal she had received from Sarah Ann Pearson, her daughter-in-law. Further evidence is brought forward of Agnes having taken out an insurance policy on her mother
prior to her mother's death. The small sum Aggie referred to is approximately £8, which is worth a little over £1,000 in 2024. From the Irish News and Belfast Morning News, 22nd of February 1905, The Doctor's Evidence, Rich Hill Poisoning Case. The magisterial investigation into the Rich Hill poisoning mystery was further continued yesterday in the courthouse in Armagh, when Mrs. Agnes Black and Mrs. Sarah Ann Pearson, daughter and daughter-in-law respectively of the late Alice Pearson of Mullavelly near Kirkhill, were charged with having wilfully and feloniously caused Alice Pearson's death on the 27th of June last, administering poison to her. As on the 2 previous days of the inquiry, the prisoners were driven to the courthouse in charge of police escort. Mrs. Black carried her infant charge in her arms and nursed it tenderly and with evident affection throughout the day. Both prisoners looked much more depressed than on Monday and were, as usual, accommodated with seats behind their respective solicitors. They never once recognised each other during the proceedings and studiously avoided even passing a glance in the same direction. Main interest centred on the evidence of Sergeant Richardson and Professor Barclay. Sergeant Richardson had brought the prisoner Sarah Ann Pearson from Montreal, and it was an accepted belief that to him she had made an important statement after the arrest. Though it was a market day in Armagh, there was again a large attendance of the general public. Professor Barclay, public analyst from Belfast and the counties of Antrim, Tyrone, Donegal and Londonderry, an analyst to a number of public bodies, was the next witness. Examined by the Crown Solicitor, he deposed that on November the 8th of last year he received from Sergeant McReynolds, Richhill, a box containing 4 jars and a bottle, all properly sealed. The first jar labelled name of deceased Alice Pearson, part of body enclosed, stomach. Date of examination 7th of November 1904. The contents of the stomach, said the witness, consisted principally potatoes, porridge and milk. He found metallic mercury which weighed 462 grams, equal to 2,694 grains, this being mixed with the food. The mercury separated out quite easily. It had never before been found, nor had he been able to trace any record of a similar case where the mercury was found or in such quantity in a human body. Witness produced a bottle containing the mercury. He also found in the stomach 1/7 of a grain of strychnine. The second jar contained the liver and kidneys of the deceased. In both of these organs he found strychnine to the extent of 132 grains. Of the metallic mercury found, the analyst said that mercury did not act as a poison while in its metallic state, although it was popularly considered to be poison. He thought it must have been administered almost immediately before the strychnine, and that this accounted for it remaining in the body. When asked about the properties of strychnine, the doctor responded that its impact was on the nervous system, producing convulsions and contractions. Having regard to the fact that the deceased complained of a bitter taste in her mouth before dinner and again after it, and was then seized with these muscular contractions, it would help to draw a conclusion as to when it was taken or administered. In his opinion, the death of Alice Pearson had been caused by strychnine poisoning. With the establishment of strychnine having been purchased by Sarah Ann having made the last meal before Alice died, the insurance policy on her mother's life from Agnes, the case was looking bleak, albeit purely circumstantial. Sarah Ann, extradited from Canada, found an unexpected confidant in the Armagh policeman escorting her back. Unaware that he was meticulously documenting their conversations, she unwittingly provided a comprehensive and admissible confession. Police Sergeant's story, Mrs. Pearson's remarkable statements. Sergeant Richardson, who was called for examination before 3:30, replying to Mr. Munro, said the warrant for the arrest of Sarah Ann Pearson in Canada was handed to him. When he saw Sarah Ann Pearson on the 31st of January, she made a statement on that occasion, and she had not received any warning from himself. She said, Aggie and Isaac are a bad pair to get me into this trouble. I bought 3p worth of strychnine in Oars in Armagh. It was Isaac gave me the money and paid for my cab in. I gave it to her in her dinner of mashed potatoes and eggs. When she was eating, she said it was sour, and she said she didn't like it. I said it was the same as I took myself. When I bought the poison, I gave the name of Sarah Hewitt. I gave the name of my own hometown, Richhill. And when I went to live with Alice, Agnes had her almost purged to death. She continued, they laughed in court in Canada when they heard about him, Isaac, dreaming. It was a nice dream. His eyes were open when he dreamed it. He knew as much about it as I did. At a later period, while on the steamer returning to London, she said, I had to laugh at Agnes the night the old woman died. She looked at her insurance book and said, God damn, I'll only get half of the insurance money. That is what was troubling her at the time. She said later, I don't expect to get off free, and I don't deserve it. It was too wicked an act. It was all Isaac's fault, all for a few pounds. If it was a couple of thousands, it would be something, and I never got a halfpenny of it. They divided it all between them, and I threw the remainder of the strychnine into the fire. While the evidence was being heard, Mrs. Pearson's eyes darted rapidly and affrighted glances between the sergeant and the magistrates, as if to estimate its effect, and her complexion, pallid at the best of times, became almost ashen in its pallor as she listened to the narration of the dreadful admission she had made. The other prisoner, Agnes Black, sat and listened in open-mouthed astonishment to the evidence, clutching her little baby convulsively to her breast, her eyes starting wildly. So terrible was the impression made by the evidence that not a sound was heard in the court, save the sound of the witness's voice and the scratching of the clerk's pen. The verdict seemed almost foregone, although the defence strenuously argued that Sarah Ann's husband, Isaac, had coerced her into the poisoning plot. They also contended that Sarah Ann, due to her purported weak-mindedness and below-average intellect, was easily influenced. With the end of the evidence and trial, the judge summed up the evidence and charged the jury to do their duty. From the Irish News and Belfast Morning News, the 10th of March 1905, Judge's Charge. His Lordship proceeded to sum up at length and recited to the jury the evidence given by the several witnesses in detail. An awful and revolting crime had been committed in their county. Could they have any doubt whatever in their minds, from the symptoms seen in the last moments of the old woman's life, and from what was found in her body after that she died from strychnine poisoning, And had they any doubt that it was the hand of Sarah Ann Pearson that administered the poison? Did they doubt the evidence of John Orr, the druggist, as to the sale of the poison? If they had any doubt whatever on their minds, the prisoner was entitled to the fullest benefit of the doubt. Had the jury any doubt in their minds that this woman knew when she bought the poison what she was doing and what the effect that poison would be? It was an awful crime. He could hardly find a parallel in his knowledge of crime in this county. If they found there was no room for any reasonable doubt, then they ought to do their duty in accordance with their oaths, and the jury retired at 6 o'clock. Verdict and sentence. On their return, there was a flutter of excitement in the crowded court, and the conversation which had previously prevailed was hushed. Having answered their names, the foreman of the jury, in reply to the clerk of the court, announced that they had found a verdict of guilty with a recommendation of mercy. His lordship, who was visibly moved, then passed sentence of death, the execution to take place on the 30th of March. The prisoner, who did not appear to thoroughly realize her awful position up at this stage, was removed from the dock, and as she disappeared from view down the steps of the dock, she was observed placing a handkerchief up to her eyes and was apparently weeping. Tomorrow morning, Agnes Black, the daughter of the deceased, will be put on trial, charged in connection with the poisoning of her mother. The following morning, Agnes Black, baby held tightly in her arms, is tried for the murder of her mother. Much of the evidence that comes out is a repeat from Sarah Ann's trial. The consensus seems to be that whilst Agnes had been trying to kill her mother slowly through repeated dosing with metallic mercury, Sarah Ann obtained the strychnine and fed it to Alice to finish her off. From the Irish News and Belfast Morning News, the 11th of March 1905, Judge's Charge. At the end of the trial, his lordship proceeded to invite the attention of the jury to the evidence in detail. It was, said the judge, a terrible and awful case they were trying. They were trying the case of a daughter charged with a crime horrible, unnatural, and revolting, the shortening or attempting to take away her mother's life by administering a noxious poison. Some remarkable testimony had been given in this case, and this, against other evidence, struck him as showing that Agnes Black, whether she committed that crime or not, was a woman of somewhat callous nature, and had not towards this old woman feelings that a daughter generally would, and towards a mother who had given her birth. Having dwelt at length upon the evidence, his lordship pointed out that the prisoner had voluntarily given her address in England to the police before leaving, so that it could not be suggested she was a fleeing of justice. During the last half hour of the wretched old woman's life, when she was expiring in agony, it did not appear that anyone was with her but her own daughter. What occurred during that half hour? It was proved that from the hour the prisoners came to live with their mother, the latter suffered from the cutting of the bowels, diarrhea. Purchases of mercury for the prisoner or by her were proved, and it was proved at the analysis that mercury was found in the old woman's stomach. The jury retired at 5:40 and returned with a verdict of guilty. Despite some sympathy for the woman, particularly Agnes, who looked a pathetic creature with her baby in her arms daily, the jury's decision led to a death sentence for Sarah Ann Pearson and life imprisonment for Agnes Black. Within the community, there was an immediate push to commute the death sentence. A comprehensive petition, eventually spanning 200 pages and signed by figures such as both archbishops, all jury members and witnesses, and a multitude of supporters, all pleaded for clemency. On the scheduled execution day, the inspectors of lunatics recommended mercy, advising the Lord Justices to commute her sentence to penal servitude for life. Consequently, she was granted a reprieve. As for Isaac, he was sentenced to 15 months hard labour, no doubt reduced due to his testimony regarding the murder of his mother. The murder of Alice Pearson in Armagh resounded in the community for decades.
Case 6. The letter that led to murder. The Ray case. True crime from 1820. For this case, we go back to 1820, to a case that, at first glance, seemed almost too simple to be true. A young woman, an indulgent and loving mother, and a modest inheritance of just £20 a year. But what makes this case so disturbing is not the crime itself, it's the reason behind it. Because at the centre of this story is a letter from a man who had once professed his love, but now makes his intentions chillingly clear. He will not marry her, not unless her mother is dead. What follows is not a crime of passion, nor desperation, but a calculated act carried out in cold blood in the hope of securing a marriage. And when the truth is uncovered, it is not forensic science that exposes the killer, but something far simpler, a mistake. One small detail that makes it impossible for the crime to have been what it appeared. This is the story of Catherine Ray, a daughter, a lover, and a murder that began with a letter.
Catherine Ray, circa 1820. This story did not get much attention in the headlines, but we found it interesting nonetheless. In short, a loving father leaves a trust fund of £20 a year to the daughter, which is kept in the care of her mother. The mother, by all accounts, is a kind woman who allows her daughter considerable liberty. The daughter falls for the local carpenter with the interesting name of Zack Weed. Catherine, the young 18-year-old, becomes pregnant, but her lover, Zack, does not want to know and will not marry her. A set of correspondence then ensues, where Zack basically points out that he has another possible that he will marry unless Catherine were to get her hands on the trust fund of £20 a year. Then he would dump the present potential wife and realign his affection to Catherine and marry her. The mother is the only sticking point to Catherine getting her hands on the money. The mother has to go. From the broadsides, circa 1820, the cruelty of a wretched daughter who inhumanely murdered her tender mother. With awe and solemnity, we attempt to comment on an act of the most inhuman barbarity committed by a cruel daughter on the body of her aged and tender mother, through then horrible effects of bad company. We learn that Mr. Ray, on his deathbed, left about £20 a year for his only daughter, Catherine, which was to remain in the hands of the mother during her natural life, and through which she made a comfortable livelihood for herself and her daughter in the settlement of Dockhead since the death of her husband. Yet we find that the frailty of nature bound the mother with such tender compassion towards her daughter that in the room for proper correction she indulged her in every gratification, so that the daughter not only disregarded her admonishment, but became puffed up with scornful pride and vanity. Through such improper indulgence that her daughter's conduct astonished every beholder, with her keeping of the most corrupt company, setting a defiance to the Almighty, and finally yielding her virtue to the seduction of an artful young man named Zack Weed, whose intrigues terminated the awful death of the mother and utter destruction of the daughter, whose company he abandoned and left her in a distressed situation in a large state of pregnancy in the 18th year of her age, and to convince her of his deceitful intention. A copy of the destructive letter sent to Catherine. Dear Catherine, in consequence of your property being at the disposure of your mother during her lifetime, I have placed my affections on a certain young lady who I mean to wed as soon as possible. Yet, if your mother was dead, you would be the only person. Therefore, I hope you will favour me a few lines stating how affairs stand at present, while I remain yours once affectionate, Z. Weed. Through studying the contents of this letter, the devil moved her yesterday morning to murder her aged mother, 53, and post him a report of her death, which brings us to a painful task of announcing the inhuman manner of which she committed the cruelty. While her tender mother lay dozing on a sick bed, first Catherine bound her hands with a handkerchief, then prepared a carving knife and cut her throat ear to ear, and left the faithful knife in the bed with her. And, after writing a letter informing her lover of the whole, she made a dreadful alarm, hoping to convince the public that her mother committed the horrible act herself. Yet, as Providence generally forms something which bringeth inhuman cruelty to light, she, the prisoner, had not the presence of mind to loosen her mother's hands, which proved to the public the impossibility of the mother committing the deed through which the daughter was taken into custody, and a copy of the following letter directed to her lover found in her pocket. Dear Zack, the contents of your letters show that life of my mother is the cause of your placing your affection on another, and in hopes that her death may be means of our future enjoyment, I've taken her life this morning for your sake by cutting her throat, whatever may be the result, and to you only I have revealed my secret, as I mean to convince the public that she, my mother, committed the deed herself. Pardon me to say that should I fail in my hopes, the one who loves you most dearly will become a victim most great to your disdain. C. Ray. Catherine was placed in jail from the incriminating letters and unexpected death of her mother. The magistrate waited until she had given birth, and she was then hung. We have no further information about Zack, although possibly he married the poor unfortunate girl with dowry he had claimed to have waiting for him.
Case 7. A Killer's Letters, the Youngman Family Murders. True crime from 1882. Our last case in this episode begins not with a body, but with a series of letters written by a young man to a woman who believed herself to be in love. At first glance, they read like ordinary expressions of affection, plans for marriage, promises of a future together. But look closer, and something far darker begins to emerge, because within those letters is a persistent and unsettling request that she ensures her life for his benefit. Again and again he urges her to conceal things from her family, to mislead others, to trust him completely, and despite warnings, despite growing suspicions, she agrees. What follows is not just a single act of violence, but a plan so cold and so poorly concealed that it leaves behind a trail of evidence written in the killer's own hand, a plan that would end not in one death, but 4. This is the story of William Godfrey Youngman and a murder plot that unfolded letter by letter.
William Godfrey Youngman has a plan which anyone with any kind of life experience would be able to see quickly through the letters he writes to ensnare a young, naive girl. The death of the girl is only part of his ill-conceived plan. This interesting tale, told through the killer's own letters, slowly uncovers a quite evil plot that ends in the death of 4 people. Seen through the eyes of a killer's actual letters, one wonders how anyone could be so deceived. William Godfrey Youngman and his murder of 4 people for £100 is today's episode of Serial Killer Saturdays. We hope you enjoy the show. From the Illustrated Police News, the 28th of October 1882, William Godfrey Youngman. Mr. William Godfrey Youngman was a young man of 25. He had been brought up as a tailor, but as a sedentary occupation did not suit his more active turn of mind, he, at the age of 24, forsook the tailor's board for the more lively and congenial profession of a gentleman's footman, or, as he more generally described himself, a liveried gentleman in waiting. When out of livery, his personal appearance was that of an ordinary London blackguard, nothing more, nothing less. He wore his black hair shortly cut, with slicked, long side locks, which were curled and brought to a point. With his muffler knotted around his neck, his cap peaked low over his eyes, his short pipe in his mouth, and his hands in his pockets, he was the type of a class which at that time might be picked out by the score in any low neighbourhood of London. He was a tolerably good scholar, and when only 20 years of age he succeeded in gaining the affections of Miss Mary Wells Streeter, then 22, the daughter of a highly respectable farmer, Mr. Samuel Wells Streeter of Hunter's Hall, Wadhurst, in Sussex. She was an exceedingly amiable and well-educated young girl, and but for her early and unwise attachment might have had an excellent chance in life. Her parents did not wish to cross her in love, allowed her to make her own choice of a lover, and beyond knowing that she was engaged to be married to a young man, they took no further trouble about the match. They knew that she received letters and wrote love letters when at home, for she was out at service a considerable amount of time, her parents wishing to bring her up in the habits of industry, and they took it for granted that she had prudence enough to make a good choice. Some of her father's friends who lived in London knew Youngman, and when they heard that she was engaged to him and that he really was Mary's young man, they expressed to her their wonder and surprise that she should have taken up with such a rough, common-looking blackguard. But she was in love with him, and therefore remonstrations was in vain. He wrote letters to her, and if she had not, like many other girls, been blindly infatuated, the very character of them ought to have caused her to have stopped with him at once. In 1860 he had kept company with her for over 5 years, and during a great part of that time he had been urging her to insure her life for £100, worth approximately £15,000 in 2023, and make the money payable to him at her death. Imagine the impudence of this diminutive, thick-set, common bulldog-looking rough, the very type of a murderer and a thief, dressed up in the livery of a gentleman's servant, writing to a respectable young girl before her marriage and asking her to do that. But as his letters are truly curious specimens of consummate impudence, it will be well to give a few extracts as an illustration. July 18th, 1860. My dearest Mary, this comes with my kindest love to you, trusting you are well and happy. Now, come to London, dear girl, on Monday next, the 23rd, then go back home again, and come up again on Friday morning, the 11th of August, and I will come on the 11th of August to meet you, and shall stay at the lodgings I shall take for both of you and myself. You can lodge somewhere on the day you come up, and I at our lodgings, so as to be ready for Saturday, when we will be married at St. Martin's Church, Charing Cross. I have published the banns of our marriage last Wednesday. You need not wear anything but your black clothes. My dear girl, at our wedding I shall only wear black clothes. I have no white gloves at all, dearest. Our coachman will serve as a father figure for you, and I shall not require a bridesmaid unless you like. If so, our housekeeper will come if she can. We will breakfast before we are married somewhere by ourselves. Bring all your things when you come on the 10th of August. Say to your mother that you're going to stay with my friends for a fortnight, and then look for a situation in the time. Write to return of post, dearest Mary, your ever affectionate lover, W.J. Youngman. P.S. Be careful and keep all your letters locked up, so that your mother and no one else can see them, and bring them with you when you come here. A letter like that, instructing her to tell an untruth to her mother, even ought to have been sufficient, but the next throws a little more light on the plot already laid. July 16th, 1860. My beloved Mary, I received your kind and most welcome letter this morning, and was glad to hear you were enjoying good health. I have made up my mind to get away from here this week, so I shall be with you next week when you come. Since I gave notice to leave last Wednesday, our people have spoken to me in a manner that does not suit me, and I am certain to give Mrs. Duncan a good talking to the next time she goes on at me again. Now, my dearest Mary, I have a form to be filled up to take to the Life Assurance Company's office, that is, to answer all the written questions asked on the printed forms, which is necessary should be done first. I know your name and address, but your occupation, I shall say you have none. You understand? But I want to know your place of birth and date, and your certificate of birth is required to be taken to the office just to let them see your right age. Then, of course, I shall say you are single and a spinster. Then I want to know your father's and mother's ages. They want to know whether you have had smallpox or have been vaccinated, or whether you have ever had any disease which tends to be shortenings of life. Let me know all this, but I can say what I like. Then it is asked, has any member of the family died of consumption? I think you said your sister died of that dreadful complaint, but, of course, I must say no to that. Then you want to know the name and residence of your medical attendant. You could say none to that question, but the name and address of an intimate friend is required to be referred to for some general information. That is to say, they just have someone to write to who knows you, and to ask them how long they have known you and your family, and are they healthy, and has your health been good, and is it so now? And to ask if any of the family have died of any bad disorder such as I have said. You must tell the friend, whoever you get to do this for you, to make it out in the best way he or she can, as you will also do, and let them also say they are not a near relation, only a friend. You understand that, dearest girl, all must be done in the best possible manner to have them assure your life, as they would not take you if they thought you were unhealthy, or any of your family had died of anything bad, or were any of them unhealthy. That would be, of course, against it. So when they write to your friend, let them give a good letter to them. Be sure and manage that with them, and to answer the letter they send by return of post. So when you come up on Monday next, all you will have to do will be to go with me to the assurance office near the Bank of England and see the medical man there. Then I can give you the money to pay the first premium on your life, which will not be a large sum, to assure £100. In case you should die, which some would be of use to your children or to me in that case, dearest girl, but it's a very good thing to do, and the duty of every mother and wife or father to assure their lives, if they can but spare a little pay every quarter. You know the benefits of all of this, therefore you will, of course, just send me the information I require of you, that I may take and fill up the form to take to the office, so they can write to your friend as I tell you. Write as soon as you can, as I am anxious to get on with it before you come next Monday to London. Now I am, with love, ever to you, your loving, affectionate William Godfrey Youngman. For the cunning villainy, the above letter stands as a masterpiece, and considering the manner in which he prompted her to tell falsehoods after falsehoods, to keep everything secret from her parents and friends, to burn all his letters, or to bring them with her, no doubt for destruction, it is surprising that she did not find spirit and resolution enough to treat him for ever with the silent contempt he deserved. She might have come to a conclusion that he was planning some dreadful scheme. One point in the letter alone ought to have convinced her, and that was that she thought he wrote in his letter it was always the duty of every father to assure his life, also for the sake of his wife and children. He had never, for the sake of her benefit, proposed to insure his own. It seemed, however, from his next letter, which he sent her, that she must have had some suspicions aroused, and that she really did consult her parents, and that they advised her not to comply with such a monstrous request, and that she sent him a letter refusing to have her life assured, for his next letter is still even more suggestive of his villainous designs. He had left his situation at the doctor's and gone home to live at his father's house, and so the letter is dated from there, and is as follows. 16 Manor Place, Walworth, Newington. My most beloved Mary, I received your affectionate note this morning, but I must say I'm very hurt to find you state in your note that you do not wish to have your life assured. Why, my dearest girl, do you alter your mind? I have been to the office, have told them to write to your friend, Mrs. James Bone, for the information they require. They did so yesterday, and expect her to send them an answer by return of post. And I told them you would come with me on Monday for the policy. So let Mrs. James Bone write to them as they wish, and that you will go with me on Monday next and assure your life as you said you would before. Why can you go from your word? You will never lose anything by assuring your life. You will not die any sooner, my dear girl. And as regards your father and mother, I'm not liking you to do so, as you can do as you like without them preventing. Now say no more to them about it, but come and do as I wish to you to do. I shall indeed never forgive you if you do not, as I wish you to do so for a particular purpose which I will tell you of. I will always pay for it, of course, and you will never lose anything by it. I intend to get a house for you near or in Brighton next week, as it will, of course, be foolish for me to go there without you, even after you have assured your life. But if you will not do this and would rather mind what your friends say to you about assuring your life, why I cannot think you would love me as I wish you would. You will never find anyone to love you so again. And would you break my heart and not do as I wish you in this little thing? Why do you not do as you said? Can you cease to love me? Will you now refuse to do this, which is for the good of those you leave behind when you should die? Surely, my dearest girl, you will still love me and do this, or how can I think you do love me if you refuse? No, I cannot believe you love me. Now, my dearest girl, I have nearly settled the assurance. I have left my situation. I have looked for a house to live in, and with your consent I have published the banns of our marriage, and you have consented to be mine next Monday week. Now can you break my heart and act like this? Do as I tell you, dearest girl, and I will do anything you wish to be done. Only do as you have agreed to do, and let me assure your life on Monday next. Be sure and bring the certificate of your birth with you on Monday. They will not keep you a moment, my dear girl. Only be mine, and do this and be happy. You cannot do wrong in this. You will never have cause to regret. Pray do as I wish. Come and do this on Monday. Come to me and be mine. You will never want for a thing while you live, believe me. I cannot but be hurt indeed, if you do not comply with my request. Do make me happy. Do this. It will all be for your good. Oh, my dearest girl, I hope you will not break my heart, that love you more than life. Be mine, and never will you want for anything, I swear. But say not a word to your friends till we are married, and then they shall be made glad, and we will have a jolly day near home. They will not be sorry for you, having me, one that makes a lady of you soon, and makes you happy for life, one who loves you more than his life. And can you not do as he wished you to do? Say yes, dearest Mary, I am, with love to you, hoping you are well and happy, your ever affectionate lover, and evermore I am your best friend, believe me, but I am hurt. Pray heal me. Say you will do as I wish, my dearest girl. I am your dearest W.G. Longman. This letter, couched in such loving language, yet so full of deep, persistent design, quite melted the poor girl's heart. So she wrote him a kind letter in return, stating that she would consent to his wishes, which cheered him up, put him in capital spirits, and he next replied as follows. 16th Manor Place, Newington, July 19th, 1860. My most beloved Mary, I received your kind and most welcome letter this morning at about 11 o'clock. I was expecting to get it by 8 o'clock, but you put borough in the address too much, so it was sent to the borough first, which caused it to be late. I filled up the paper and took it to the life assurance office, so you can come with me to the office before 2 o'clock on Monday. When you come up, will you arrive in London at about 9:30 on the Monday morning? That was the time I arrived last Monday week. Do not, my dearest girl, say anything to your mother about what you are going to do. Only say you are coming to see me and stay with me and my friends till you get a situation here in London. I think you had better not bring all your things, only the most particular ones, the best you have, and above all, bring all your letters and papers. Leave nothing of importance, as all little things you have I want to see. You must bring the certificate of birth with you, as it must be taken to the office on Monday next, before this quarter's premium is paid, and I wish it to be paid on Monday next. I will take lodgings for you and me when you come up on Monday. If you can borrow a little money from your father, do so for a few days, when I can give it to you to send him back, as money is short with me till about this Thursday. But I want to see you, dearest, and get your life assured, and get many things settled before then. Do not forget to bring your birth certificate, as you cannot assure your life without it. I hope you will let me have an answer by return of post, my beloved girl. I am your dear and most affectionate W. G. Youngman. P.S. Kind remembrance to your friend. You might bring a little of your homemade butter and some things with you, only do not say I told you. You understand, it will be for your good, my dearest girl. Every surrounding circumstance showed that the fellow had scarcely a shilling, with his thorough determination to get her to assure her life, and his meanness in asking her to bring butter and other things from her father's house to live in lodgings with him before marriage seemed to cause her again to suspect his motives, and she once more wrote to him again, positively refusing to assure her life. However, he wrote to her another letter, still urging her not to disappoint him, as follows. 16 Manor Place, Walworth, London, July 1860. My dearest girl, I received your letter this morning. I am very much hurt to find you say you will not have your life assured after I have troubled, and you have promised me faithfully to have it done, and to be my own dear wife on Monday next. But Tuesday will do as well as Monday, my dear girl, only your father and mother must not know it. But once, my dearest Mary, if you will only let Mrs. James Bone write to the assurance office at once, and go with me to have your life assured on Monday morning next, I will settle with you, and after that is done, your friends may know that we are going to be married. Keep to your promise, dear girl, and your friends shall know we are married the same day we are, next Tuesday week. But I must first assure your life, as I have a great wish for you to do so. Your affectionate lover, ever till death, William Godfrey Youngman. After the receipt of this letter, Miss Streeter came up to London, but instead of going to any lodgings before marriage with the prisoner, she had the prudence to go to a very intimate friend of her father's, Mr. Edward Spice, who kept the Green Dragon public house, Bermondsey Street, in the Borough. As Mr. Spice and her father had been brought up as boys together, they often used to visit, and when she came up a few days afterwards on the 23rd of July, she stayed at Mr. Spicer's house. But before going there, she eventually yielded to Youngman's entreaties and went and assured her life. Mr. Spice disapproved of Youngman, and while Miss Streeter was at his house, he tried to get her to break it off with him, and told her that he was certain that he meant her no good, and that he was very sorry to see her throwing herself away. On Tuesday night, Youngman came again to his house to see her, and Mr. Spice, seeing a great deal in him that he did not like, he said to Miss Streeter in the presence of Youngman, "Mary, I would sooner see you take a rope and hang yourself in my skittle ground than see you marry a man like this." Then turning to Youngman, he said in a very angry manner before the bar, "What means have you got to support my girl?" Youngman replied, "I am independent." "And what is your independency? Was it left by a legacy? Have you got anything to show me? Any paper?" said Spice. "Oh, it is in houses," replied Youngman. "And where are your houses, in London or in the country?" inquired Mr. Spice. "Oh, in various places," answered Youngman. "Then you must be a rich man, if you have a house in the country and in London too," said Mr. Spice. He then turned to Miss Streeter and said, "You take my advice. Give him a total denial. Have no more to do with him, but go and seat yourself in my bar parlour, and I will take you safely home to your father." Youngman then said he intended to take her to Brighton, and soon after went away. Miss Streeter stayed that night at Mr. Spice's house, and the following day he saw her safe off home, and advised her to tell her father and have no more to do with Youngman. It would have been well for her had she taken Mr. Spice's and her friend's advice, but on the following Saturday night Youngman wrote to her again to tell her to be sure to come up by the first train on the Monday morning to get ready for Tuesday. He said, "Bring or burn all your letters, my dear girl. Believe me, ever your loving, affectionate William Godfrey Youngman." She collected all her little valuables together and came up punctually on time with a light heart to meet him at London Bridge, in readiness to be married on Tuesday morning. He met her, and from there he took her to his father's and mother's lodgings at 16 Manor Place in Newington, where he introduced her as his future wife. She, instead of going to Mr. Spice's again, consented to stay till morning at Youngman's mother's house. The poor girl thought she had come to be married in the morning, but she had in reality come to be murdered. What was to have been the day of her wedding was the day of her death, and at the time she thought to have been a bride, she was lying in a mangled corpse in a murderer's den. Instead of there being a crowd round St. Martin's Church at Charing Cross to see a wedding, there was a crowd in the house at 16 Manor Place, Walworth, and many thousands outside to see, if possible, Mary Wells Streeter lying on the floor upstairs with a stab wound in her breast and her throat cut from ear to ear, and 3 other persons round her weltering in their blood, all murdered too. The place resembled a slaughterhouse. The floors were deep in blood. Scarcely had ever such a 4 barbarous murders been known. The 3 other persons murdered were Elizabeth Youngman, aged 46, his mother, Thomas Youngman, aged 6, and Rayson Youngman, aged 11, his 2 younger brothers. This monster, William Godfrey Youngman, first got the girl to insure her life, then decoyed her to his house a week afterwards for the purpose of obtaining the miserable sum of £100 by her death. His father rose at 5 in the morning and went to his work, and then this inhuman butcher first plunged a dagger into the hearts of his two brothers as they lay sleeping and unconscious in bed, and then cut their throats. Then he attacked his bride and murdered her, and then, lest there should be any other witness of his guilt left, he murdered his mother in the same way also. The noise of his mother falling on the floor awoke the landlord of the house in the room below, and running upstairs in fright at the noise, Youngman was taken almost red-handed in his crime. When the police were fetched, he was standing in his shirt on top of the landing. The rest of his miserable, clumsy plot only now remains to be told. He said when his father and the police came up, "Father, see what mother has done." He tried to make it appear that his mother, in a fit of insanity, had awoken at about 5:30 and had first murdered his two brothers and then his sweetheart that he was going to marry. And then she attacked him, and in self-defense he wrestled the dagger out of her hands and murdered her with it. Youngman was tried at the Central Criminal Court on August the 16th before Justice Williams. Youngman was tried only for the murder of Miss Streeter, so that if he had got off for that, he would have been tried for the murders of his mother and brothers. But at the close of the evidence, the jury, after a deliberation of 10 minutes, found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. The last hours of this barbarous, unrelenting criminal were characterized with the greatest hardihood to the end. As no one would send any petitions to the Home Secretary, he wrote to him himself, stating that he was innocent of the crime, and it was all his mother's doing, and that he had only killed her in self-defense. The Home Secretary declined the request. Visit by father and sister. While awaiting his execution in prison, Youngman was visited by his father and sister. With his father, he had a long and ferocious altercation, in the course of which he accused his father of gross ill usage towards the mother he had murdered, and expressed the conviction that, but for his father's treatment of his family, he would now be a free man. "Mother was driven to madness by your ill treatment, and you are a bad parent," exclaimed Youngman. He railed for some time in impotent fury at the witness Spice. He stretched out his right hand with a significant gesture. "One thing only I wish," he said, "and that is that I could get hold of this Spice, for I would stroke his head off." Occasionally he was seen to be in tears, shed in pity for himself. Before the day of execution he tried to commit suicide, but was prevented. He was executed by Calcraft on the top of Horsemonger Lane Jail on the 4th of September before a crowd of at least 30,000 people, the largest that had ever assembled since the executions of the Mannings. To the very last he obstinately refused to retract his oft-repeated story, and he paid no heed to the urgent exhortations of the chaplain. He spoke of himself as an injured being, almost a martyr, and from this point of view nothing could move him. Thus died William Godfrey Youngman, the Walworth murderer.
Further particulars. And now for our further particulars. To understand this next story, we need to step briefly into the Victorian nursery, a place that by modern standards could be surprisingly perilous. In the 19th century, it was not uncommon for parents, particularly mothers, to rely on so-called soothing syrups to calm restless infants. Sleepless nights, teething pains, and incessant crying were often treated not with rocking or routine, but with medicine. One of the most popular of these was something called Godfrey's cordial. Now, to Victorian families, This was considered a blessing, a trusted household remedy. It was widely sold, widely used, and widely recommended. What many did not fully appreciate was that some versions of this cordial contained opiates and even alcohol. And while it was very efficient at putting children to sleep, it could also ensure that they didn't wake up. In 1840, one such case came before a coroner's inquest, a quiet domestic tragedy that raised uncomfortable questions about a medicine thousands of families were using every single day. This news article came as a shock at the time. Godfrey's cordial was a standard to middle-class families to give to children to help them sleep. At least one of the versions contained brandy and a version of opium, such as laudanum. It was highly effective in putting children to sleep. From the Warwick and Warwickshire Advertiser, November 1840, cautioning respecting Godfrey's cordial. On Monday, an inquest was held before Mr. Baker at the Prince of Orange, Phillip Street, St. George's in the East, on the body of Francis Albert Delt, aged 3 months, the son of a melter in the Mint. It appeared that the deceased was a twin child and that he and his brother had been subjected to convulsive screaming from their birth, to allay which the mother had been in the habit of administering to them Godfrey's cordial. The dose given to them was a teaspoon at a time. At first, the cordial produced a good effect. On Wednesday night last, on going to bed, the mother gave each twin the usual dose, and between 3 and 4 o'clock the next morning she found the deceased dead by her side in bed. The other child was in an extremely drowsy state, but was recovered by prompt medical aid. There were no marks of violence on the body, nor any to show that the deceased child had been overlaid. The medic who examined, not being able to state positively the cause of death, the jury gave the following verdict: found dead in bed, but there was no evidence to prove the precise cause of death. Advertisement. Spurious imitations of Godfrey's cordial are being offered to sale by many vendors of medicine, in bottles similar to the genuine and in small quantities by druggists, etc., and purchasers should be particular in seeing that the proprietor's name, Benjamin Godfrey Windus, 61 Bishopsgate Street, is engraved on the government stamp, whereby alone may they be assured that they are about to administer the genuine medicine. Many thousands of persons who have proved the efficacy of this medicine considered it the safest and best that can be given to children, and if the mother of an infant takes an occasional dose, as prescribed in the directions, she would feel it most beneficial both to herself and child. Well, something tells me it's time to stop. It may be the insistent disapproval of the barn owl, or the early morning chorus of birds politely suggesting we've gone on quite long enough, or perhaps the red velvet-coated ferrets now yawning and consulting their waistcoat pocket watches with increasing impatience. Either way, we shall take the hint. If you've enjoyed tonight's episode, do consider a like, a subscribe, or a share. It helps the channel enormously and keeps the owls broadly content. And if you'd like to go further, our Patreon holds a rather extensive archive, hundreds upon hundreds of additional cases, many of them exclusive, all available for a mere £5 a month. This has been News of the Times, and I'm Robin Coles, collector of obscure Victorian anxieties, occasional interpreter of suspicious teapots, and firm believer that no good ever came of a quiet knock at the door after midnight. Until next time, good night, and do take care, particularly in fog, near waterways, or in the company of anyone who insists you try something they've prepared especially.